We have to work with the government of Quebec to fix the damage the Liberals caused with an out-of-control immigration system. And I also have to say that I reject the Century Initiative, which is a Liberal policy to balloon Canada's population to 100 million people. That's extreme. I think we should go back to immigration levels that are such that the population never grows faster than the number of houses, jobs, or healthcare services available.
Would you give more money to Quebec? And more generally,
types in those circumstances, temporary foreign workers, for example, and it's a question of distribution, if I can say it that way. The distribution of workers across Quebec, and there's a shortage of workers, but we will maintain the cap on immigration for certainly a couple of years so that we can increase our ability to welcome newcomers.
Would you reduce the number of immigrants to Canada in general?
Instead of answering with a simple yes or no, I would want to base our response on the facts. It is obvious that we need immigration. When I speak to Quebec farmers, they tell me, yes, we need immigrants to work on our farms. When I talk to small and medium businesses, they tell me that we need immigrants. The question is, what level of immigration? We would base our immigration levels on the findings of an expert panel, which would study our capacities. Then we would have a data-based number. But I do not want to fall into the trap of fear-mongering or blaming immigrants for things. We need a facts-based, needs-based approach.
Francais.
Temporary foreign workers are temporary. They're a different category. Foreign students are a separate category, and they are essential for our post-secondary establishments in Quebec and in Canada. Unfortunately, it's being used as a roundabout way to get asylum, and asylum is also taken advantage of through smuggling and organized crime. We don't want to import vulnerable workers because we simply need people. Asylum seekers should be people who are in distress.
Another rare moment where I agree with Mr. Blanchet. Temporary foreign workers are often victims of power abuses. We would restrict the use of workers who are exploited by major corporations.
The Centre Initiative was 100 million immigrants in Canada before the end of the century. Dominic Barton, a parliamentary committee, said that they did not take into account the uniqueness of Quebec, and one of the two co-authors of the Centre Initiative and 100 million people is now one of Mr. Carney's close advisors.
Mr. Carney, on a different subject now, would you say that the immigration system in Canada is going off the rails, or has gone off the rails in the last 7 or 8 years?
Well, yes. The system isn't working. And especially after the pandemic. Our population has gone up, I think, at about 3% per year because of immigration. And that's why we need to have a cap for a certain period of time. And I'd like to say that Canadians, Quebecers, and all Canadians, they want to welcome immigrants. There's no problem with Canadians' attitudes here at all. It's the responsibility of all of us to increase our capacity to welcome newcomers.
Is it normal? Now, in France, it takes 6 months. In Germany, 8 months. So, why do asylum seekers coming to Canada take at least 3 years to be processed?
Because Canada is obstinate in welcoming more people than they can process, house, and they're not taking into account the proportionality of every province and territory.
I spoke with federal public servants, and they told me that there is a lack of resources. There aren't enough workers to manage all the files that are coming in. It's unthinkable that people have to wait 3 years for an answer.
But is that not the
It's
big
a
problem,
huge
Mr. Poilievre?
problem. So we need to have more people working on this. People who can make decisions or at the very least provide an answer, because it is entirely unacceptable that we have people waiting so long.
Mr. Poilievre, is this problem solvable?
Yes. Look, it's all about efficiency. By screening out bogus asylum seekers, that's what's slowing things down. We could reduce processing times by getting rid of the bogus claimants. And when people are forum shopping, when they've been to other places, that also slows things down and discourages genuine claimants. My point of view is that if someone's in danger in their country of origin, they should be able to decide to come to Canada. But if they're not refugees, for example, we've seen a situation in Mexico where people came here without ever needing to be refugees. They never needed asylum, and that causes a bottleneck in the system. And so what we're going to do is ensure that genuine refugees can come here and have their lives saved through the generosity of Canadians.
But how do you separate the real ones from the non-real ones?
Well, that's the problem. The machine, the apparatus is too cumbersome. And Mexico was one of the causes in the problem. So by eliminating that source, that helps alleviate the problem.
Is that an acceptable wait time in Canada?
No, it's not acceptable. It's inhumane. It's inhumane for asylum seekers. And that's an indication that there is a problem with productivity in that department. That takes resources, but it's also a question of productivity.
Why not hitting the brake pedal with kindness, of course? Why not slow things down until we have a good system and a good public service for immigration that can deal with files in a few months? The rhythm is far too quick, and so we can't succeed at this rate. People, for economic reasons or who are in distress for other reasons, come to Canada and they're lost because their files aren't being processed.
You can conclude, Mr. Carney.
I more or less agree with that, but we need to be, as you've said, we need to be neutral. We need to act in a neutral and fair way.
All right.
A fair way for all.
I want to save some time to talk about two other important files: international aid, Ukraine, and Gaza. I think we've understood your position on immigration. The question is simple. Should we cut international aid or not? I'll give you some figures here. $2.1 billion is being given to Ukraine currently. That's a large amount of money for Canada. Ethiopia also. Haiti. There's a long list of other countries that we could have put up on the board. Mr. Poilievre, you've said that we need to cut international aid. What would you cut? Ukraine, Ethiopia, Haiti?
No. I would start by cutting off China. The Liberal government gave $250 million to the Chinese Infrastructure Bank in order to build pipelines, highways, and other infrastructure to promote the expansion of Beijing's empire. I don't think that's a good use of taxpayer money. Also, we saw UNRWA, the organization in the Gaza Strip that took part, or whose employees took part in the attacks of September 7th. So I don't think we should be funding that type of activity either. The aid we give should be directly to people in need and not through bureaucracies, multinational bureaucracies and terrorists.
Let's talk about Gaza. Currently, Doctors Without Borders, just today, said that the situation was worse than ever. So if you cut UNRWA, which might be an imperfect organization, but if you cut aid to them, how can Canada help Palestinians?
With not-for-profit groups, NGOs that will deliver the services directly to Gazans.
The only group
on the ground.
I'd like to
because it's a waste of money when that money that's not even getting to the people?
I will start by saying if there's anyone in an organization with a problem, then yes, that should be investigated. But what you said about UNRWA was disgusting. This is the only organization that is helping out people on the ground. And you painted the entire organization with the same brush, calling it a terrorist organization. That is unacceptable. That is hateful, and it is entirely inappropriate.
Mr. Carney, on this subject of Palestinians and international aid, would you continue to fund UNRWA?
Yes. We are in a situation where we need to have an immediate ceasefire. We need to have all the hostages returned, and we need to resume humanitarian aid to Gaza. And at this time, we have $100 million from the Government of Canada that is ready to be provided in humanitarian aid to Gaza with organizations that are working there. And that's key. And I agree with Mr. Singh. There are only a couple of groups that are working in Gaza right now.
Mr. Blanchet?
It's a very unique situation. In Canada and in Quebec, the Jewish community is victims of radical Islamists. Palestinians are currently victims of terrible violence from the Israeli regime. We have to help people in distress. There and elsewhere, it's the best way to have international aid that is not military. We need to allow people to live happily where they live. And Palestine will not become Mar-a-Lago for Americans that
God
just want
damn
to
it.
chill
Sorry,
on
I'm
the
just...
coast.
This is a
We have to see where the money
real
goes.
sloppy
We have to see
conflation
how much
that I
money
think
is taken by Hamas. It's maybe less now, but it was huge in the past. A lot of money was taken from the Palestinians. We
like
have to help
I understand where
Palestinians
he's
at the end
going,
of
but
the
I
day.
don't think he
International
should be
aid, so the three of you on this side would continue. Mr. Poilievre,
so like unthinkingly
do you have an amount
mixing
in
those
your
two
mind
issues
of
together.
how much you would cut in international aid?
they're connected,
We're
but
gonna
it's like
target waste.
that didn't seem responsible.
In all programs, we will audit to identify examples like UNRWA when they used funds for Hamas. We're also going to find other examples of international waste because
Sorry.
the decision is to protect Canadian taxpayers. We all agree that there's a lot of suffering here in Canada, and Canadians can't afford to pay their bills. So we need to find some savings in order to reduce the cost of living here in Canada.
Mr. Roy, I would like to
Thank
come
you
back
for
to
catching
need
that
to
I
look
was
at
muted early.
all
I don't know why that
departments
keeps
in
happening.
order
I
to
think it's
find
every time
those
it crashes.
savings
It
and
like
protect
resets me to like a
affordability
No amount.
to
in Canada.
the question of Gaza.
Mr. Singh, I'm sorry, everyone's had their piece to say.
The situation is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see innocent people being killed. Mr. Carney, why don't you call things as they are? This is a genocide. People in Israel do deserve peace and security, but people in Palestine do as well. What is going on right now is a genocide against people
Mr.
in
Carney,
Palestine.
you can conclude.
Why won't you admit it?
The situation in Gaza, in the Middle East, is horrible. But
It's a genocide.
But I never use that word in a political way to politicize the situation.
All right.
But it's a matter of facts.
That was Mr. Carney's
Well, I wonder if he
response.
would still
I think we've
because
understood.
there's members of his
Your question,
party,
Mr. Singh.
including
Now,
Christian Freeland and a number of others
Moving
who've
on to
called
the next theme, identity and
Russia's
sovereignty.
treatment of Russia's actions in Ukraine genocidal.
To put flags
They've all
out on our
voted. Most of them voted
balconies to show
unanimously
our
to say
Canadian
that
pride.
China's treatment of the
I
Uyghurs
was
is
surprised
genocidal.
to see how proud people were.
He said he doesn't use that
We're
word
Canadian.
without
We will not be
judgment from the
Americans.
ICC. There's no
I think
judgment
we're
from the
going to be
ICC
more
on the other
united.
two. So I
think
would be
I haven't seen this
interesting
in a
if
long
he's
time.
changed the Liberals'
So,
position on the other two
yes,
situations.
we've all seen this across Canada. All commentators have seen this. There is a wave of patriotism in Canada, but
here we
we've
go.
also seen deep divisions in the West, Alberta, says it may
Nationalisme.
separate. We've given 6 months to the next prime minister to meet its requests.
Identity and sovereignty.
Otherwise, there could be a crisis of national unity that is unprecedented. In Quebec, the Parti Québécois is nearing power and is promising a referendum during your term, possibly. At the end of the day, are we not as divided or as the U.S. or very divided? We'll go around the table. Mr. Poilievre first.
Unfortunately, yes, there are divisions all across Canada, all kinds of divisions. And I think that we've had a federal government that has divided everyone, pitting regions against one another and various groups against one another. Social classes pitted against one another. We need to unite Canadians. We need to unite around our common identity. That includes the French language, our English language, our military, the promise of Canada that anyone who works hard can have a great life in a beautiful house on a safe street.
Thank you.
Oh
Mr.
my
Singh,
God.
is there not
Bonus points for
division in Canada?
you almost got
When I
the whole
travel
thing in
throughout
there,
the
so
country,
points for that at least. Points for trying.
observe great unity, great solidarity. Canadians want to defend our country. They do not want to become the 51st state. They want to protect what is dear to our hearts. When I talk to people about identity, people tell me our identity is taking care of one another. We have programs for that. For example, our healthcare system. We need to protect these systems and strengthen them, not cut them or sacrifice them. Now is the time to bring people together.
Thank you.
To get things done with our solidarity.
Thank you. Mr. Blanchet.
I think that people confuse certain things. Some people think that all Canadians should follow one single line behind the federal government, and so we only have one economy. Mr. Trump's fear, or rather the threat of Mr. Trump, has to be taken seriously, but instrumentalizing it for nation building in Canada, where Quebecers are being asked to be attached to their language as a frivolity, I can't agree with that.
Thank you. We'll go back.
Quebec's uniqueness is also economic, and we have to be on the same level
Is there
playing
a
field.
division in Canada?
Well, there's always a risk. But I think that right now, Canadians are uniting, and they want to unite. Canadians want a positive agenda. There is solidarity here. Healthcare is a right here in Canada. It's not a big business like in the United States. We put a value on diversity here. And we also put importance on judicial independence. And, you know, the potential of Canada is enormous because we're all in this together.
Thank you. So open debate. Mr. Blanchet. How can we think that Quebec, if it's on its own and independent, could be stronger to stand up to Trump and in comparison with all of Canada right now?
Does Canada need to be a province of Mexico to be allied to Mexico against the states? We're not in that debate this week, but Quebec does not need to be a Canadian province to talk of its own voice. Our economy is doing fairly well, but our economy is different to that of Canada's, and the announcements that have been made have helped Ontario Steel, Ontario Banking, the Ontario automotive industry to
Quebec
fund
Aluminum.
Western oil. That is what those were the investments made. The counter tariffs on aluminium are very harmful because people have to pay for the aluminium they sent to be processed in the States. That's then re-imported into Canada. $2 billion to the States in countervailing tariffs. For that, nothing happened. But now, $2 billion has simply been signed by Mr. Carney for the automotive industry. He sees himself as a negotiator, but he hasn't even been re-elected yet. Should Quebecers not make sure that they have a strong voice that collaborates. I've already said that we would work with Canada, but I've asked to speak to Mr. Carney, but he's never called me. He's never wanted to talk to me.
Aww.
I want Quebec to be at the negotiating table for a stronger
Carney,
negotiating
why won't you
position
call
with
him?
Canada.
Is there also not a risk, like was the case with the automotive industry in Ontario, to this, because this could happen to the detriment of saving other industries in our country? If we put all our eggs in the automotive basket.
Not at all. For example, our counter tariffs for the aluminum sector and steel, no, they're not bad. They're not bad at all.
We import aluminium cans from the States that comes from our
that's
mined
not,
aluminium.
Oh, just saying no.
if I
Nope.
may, the counter tariffs
wrong.
for the aluminum sector are $30 billion. The counter tariffs, or $30 billion rather. The counter tariffs for the automotive sector, that's
Wait.
$8 billion.
New York
That's
Times
a
alert: Trump
huge
convinced Israel
difference
not to strike Iran
because,
nuclear facilities per
you know,
Trump
there are a number
admin.
of reasons for this, but our counter tariffs,
When were they going to do that?
just for Quebec, it's for the workers there, are much higher.
I don't know where that money came from. I don't know when the industry will get
No,
that money.
we are using the counter
What
tariffs.
was it, $2 billion for automotive? Immediately for them, because we're shaking in our boots when the automotive industry is at risk. But aluminium was not supported. There's no processing capacity. There's no help for temporary work
We're
losses.
a little bit behind,
$2 billion
so I'm just
for the
going to
automotive
turn this
industry.
up to
But nothing for aluminium. When it's
1.25.
Ontario, the checks come flying, but they have to be the same for
try
other
and
places.
Catch us up a little bit.
That's the numbers. Your numbers are wrong.
Mr. Poilievre?
Yeah, but he's got a point when he says that the weakness in our country right now threatens our unity. Your Liberal government for 10 years has the worst track record on immigration, on housing, on inflation, on crime. But doesn't it embarrass you to ask Canadians for a fourth term of office after the worst Liberal record?
I've just become leader. And
Same members of Parliament, it's the same old promises.
And I've been Prime Minister for 1 month. And in that month, we have an agreement with the provinces. We have an agreement with Australia. We have an agreement with France. We have an agreement with the United Kingdom. We have set up negotiations for the next Prime Minister, and that's a decision that people at home are going to make. And we've done all of that in this short time. And we've also cut the tax. We've put in place programs for workers who are most affected by this tariff war, and all that in 1 month.
Okay.
Quebec sent a letter with 5 requests. No one responded to it. We made requests, but we keep hearing, oh, we spoke to provinces, things are great with Quebec, but we didn't get any response to our letter. Is it because of the final straight of the election campaign? What's going on?
Mr. Carney, you described healthcare as a right, and I agree with that. But you are talking about massive
not at
cuts
all.
to healthcare.
Not
You
at all.
admitted it.
Mr. Singh, I let you speak earlier.
The long-time
Singh,
Liberal government House leader, Karina Gold,
2,
agreed that there
3.
would be
Mr.
cuts.
Singh, got his mic.
Ooh!
I let you speak more earlier, but now we're nearing the end. We're talking about Quebec and French. Does Quebec have the right to defend French, even at the cost of using the notwithstanding clause upstream? Mr. Poilievre.
Yes, Quebec must defend French. It's the common language of Quebec, and I will defend French. My father was a francophone from Saskatchewan. I lost my French a little bit when I was a teenager, but I married a Quebecer. Our children speak French, and I understand why French needs to be protected, and that is why I will continue to support laws and policies that allow Quebec and the federal government to protect French all across Canada.
Using the notwithstanding clause to protect something. What, you're against that, Mr. Carney?
Well, there is a general question here around the use of the notwithstanding clause in a preventative way. And it's not necessarily a question just for Quebec. It's been used in Quebec, but it could also apply in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. And it has. And so the question is, do we have rights and freedoms here in Canada? Are we equal? And we need to consider the right balance Certainly. But the use of the notwithstanding clause in a preventative way, that's a question for the Supreme Court.
Mr. Blanchet, in terms of the use of the notwithstanding clause, obviously you have no problem with that.
Jean Chrétien, on behalf of Pierre Trudeau, negotiated with the provinces, and it led to the notwithstanding clause. And this wasn't signed on by Quebec. It was tested. It's not the type of use that is in question, it's how it is used. The Supreme Court has already decided. Mr. Carney wants to turn to the Supreme Court to disagree with itself in the decision it made with Quebec. It's all funded with Quebec money.
Interveners from Quebec who have challenged this to the Supreme Court.
You're going to take Quebec taxpayer money to contest a Quebec bill that is under Quebec jurisdiction.
That was
adopted by the National Assembly of Quebec.
Mr. Singh, on this notwithstanding clause for French.
I believe in protecting the French language. During this debate, I have tried to bring up health a few times. Mr. Roy cut me off a number of times. Look at my time on the clock. Every time I tried to bring up healthcare, I was responding directly to something that Mr. Carney said, because health is something that is important for me. It is about identity. It's something I am very passionate about, and every time I tried to bring it up, Mr. Roy called me out and cut me off. That is not fair. For me, the question of healthcare is crucial. When I talk to people on the street and ask them what is important to them, they say universal public healthcare. People ought to know that the other leaders on this stage tonight would cut healthcare funding, and I think that's wrong.
No.
Not now, Mr. Blanchet.
No, neither
Two
Mr.
major
Blanchet
leaders have
nor
both
I have
said
said
this,
that.
and I need to tell people because it's important. This is what I believe in. This is what I believe in and what the NDP believes in.
That's not right to make allegations
Okay,
like that.
we talked about health earlier. I let you speak, but now we're moving on to another topic.
Yes, but now we need to bring it up in the context of
Okay.
identity. What is Canadian identity? Healthcare. We have to bring it up in this part of the debate. Canadian identity is about taking care of one another. We need our universal public healthcare system. It should be strengthened. It should be protected. We are in the midst of a healthcare crisis. It's supposed to be an open debate, so we should be able to talk about whatever topic comes up.
There's a lot of risk when it comes to the health of a language in
Let's
Quebec.
talk about language.
There's
Outside
healthcare
of
issues in
Quebec.
Quebec as well, and I am here to protect the healthcare system for everyone, including Quebecers.
Outside of Quebec, Mr. Singh and others, the weighting of francophones has gone from 6%
In
in
fairness to
71
Singh, he
to
does look like he-
3.5% in 2021. How will you reverse this
Blanchet
trend? People are listening to you across Canada.
And
Well, first of all,
Carney have about
we
20.
are going to
Blanchet almost has
increase
24
the
minutes.
level of
He has the
Francophone
most
immigrants
speaking time.
outside of Quebec. We'll increase
Carney's
that
in
from 10
second,
to 12%.
followed by Polyev.
Second, we will strengthen Radio-Canada and CBC with
But it looks like
structure.
Singh only
and
just
money.
got
Mr.
about 20
Polyev
minutes
wants
of
to cut
speaking
that.
time.
We are going to strengthen
And that'll be handy for
the,
tomorrow. Cool.
telefilm industry and the Canadian Council for the Arts so that we can increase training.
All right, Mr. Polyev.
First of all, the Conservative Party supported the federal legislation to ensure that federally regulated workplaces in Quebec follow Bill 101. We also will increase funding to allow young people to take part in French immersion for Anglophones coming from outside Quebec, and that will enrich the French language. And third, we'll make sure Quebec has more control over immigrant selection so that they can better choose those who can be franchised and integrated into the labor market and Quebec culture. That's what we want to do to protect the French language.
Mr. Polyev, of course, your position on Radio-Canada and the CBC has created a lot of concerns. You've continued to say that you would protect Radio-Canada because it provides a service to Francophone minorities across the country, but you would abolish the CBC. How is such a thing possible?
Well, it is possible. We have news networks.
But they share the same buildings. You understand how difficult it would
I
be.
do understand the situation. I will protect Radio-Canada's services because there's already other French language news services. TVA is an example. So it is possible to have news service that's focused on French news services, and the CBC can just operate with its own revenues as an NGO,
and what would the
as a
timeline be?
non-governmental organization. The principle is that the government should simply do what the market cannot do, and the market would never be able to provide exclusive French services to Francophones all across Canada. So there is a role for the government to play in defending French news services. When I was a young person in Calgary, that was the only way for me to get news in French. So I would protect those services
Mr. Poilievre
because
is
there's a good
saying-
reason to do that.
Let me translate that Mr. Poilievre wants to get rid of Radio-Canada and CBC. And then he would write a check to other companies so that they can provide French language services. That's the wrong thing to do. We would protect Radio-Canada and CBC, especially in the context of a misinformation which is undermining.
Yeah, was that him just, because I think, is that what is Singh on it there, where he's saying that that's what Poilievre's plan is? He would just...
It enriches our country. Having Quebec benefits all of Canada.
Or like he changed the mandate so that it would only have to give French services?
We need the French language and we will protect
So I don't know if he was suggesting.
For the first time since 2011, there are no women here as leaders.
That he'd get rid of Radio-Canada and just give the money to TVI.
I met with her earlier this week. Do you have a question for the leaders? Something you're concerned about? In Canada, the status of women. Yeah, the status of women. You're worried about things moving backward? Yes, that there could be a rollback of women's rights by some parties. That concerns me. My question, would you commit to making sure that there are no women's rights that are rolled back? And, for example, would you push for having free contraception, as is already the case in some provinces? Is that something that you would commit to, starting with Mr. Poilievre?
We will not eliminate that. We will protect women's rights. I have a message for Canadian women who are watching. We will not pass legislation that would restrict the right to abortion. That's been our policy for 20 years, and it won't change. That's a guarantee that I make to you. We will, in fact, broaden women's rights by dealing with crime against women. Women are often victims of assaulters who are released because of liberal legislation. They're released repeatedly, and that allows serious criminals to repeat offend against women. And we are going to lock those people up. We're going to lock those men up to protect women against violence.
Of course, our party believes in women's rights. We would never allow for any backsliding on that front. You brought up pharmacare. Well, it was the NDP that forced the Liberal government to bring in pharmacare. It covers now diabetes medication, but also contraceptives, and we believe that is crucial. Rights are important, but being able to access the rights is also important. We are also the only party running a candidate slate that is half women. The other parties have seen backsliding on their candidate slates in terms of diverse people and women. But for us, it's an important issue. Our candidate slate must represent the Canadian public, and that means it should be half women. For us, we will always defend women's rights and also access
Thank you, Mr.
to those rights.
There is no member of the Bloc Québécois that will be able to table a bill or motions that are against abortion. Preventive maid will also not be allowed. With American influence, we are in a very difficult place for women. There are many ways that invite women to participate in politics. We have reached parity with the Bloc Québécois. We wanted it to be 50-50, but in our current political culture, I have many great women in my party. It's much more difficult at the federal level than in Quebec.
Yes, I think that this, an aspect of politics right now, the negative politics that we're seeing, it's becoming more and more difficult to recruit women as candidates, and really any candidate. But absolutely, we defend the rights of women all the time. But what I'm concerned about is the use of the notwithstanding clause. Not in a preventative way, but after Supreme Court judgments have been made. That, what does that do? It takes away Canadians' rights and freedoms. And it creates, and Mr. Poilievre has proposed this I know the situation, but this is a very dangerous development, because if we start with that, abortion could be,
Give the right to reply.
the right to abortion could eventually be next.
Mr. Poilievre, you can answer.
Mr. Kearney, I said in a case where a man kills 6 people in a premeditated way and the court released that person, that means he served 4 years for each life he took. The criminal in that case will be free in 50 years. You're talking about danger. That's what's dangerous. Liberal laws that allow criminals to circulate on our streets. I will never excuse for locking murderers up.
No, I'm sorry, but you're trying to change the Canadian Constitution.
All right,
That's
gentlemen.
what you've proposed.
Hey,
I would
Zermus.
use Section
Hi,
33
his
to put
position
an
for English
end to
services
the
is that there is
crime
enough
that
private sector
liberals
offering
are
that it is
starting
not
their
needed as a
policies.
Where
government
will you
funded
stop?
institution. The fact is French
stopping
answer, including that
murderers,
aspect,
yes.
is weird. Yeah.
Everyone knows that there should be severe
Yeah, no,
penalties
that
for
almost
murder.
feels like he slipped up
You're
there.
trying to sow division here. Everyone agrees
And
on
also,
that fact. If someone
with
kills
that
someone, there
being
needs to
his
be a
point,
strong punishment. You're not
No, that's
special
when you
because
look
of
at
that.
who he's giving his questions to
No, the other
at his
everyone
press
agrees.
conferences of the four, it's pretty interesting because
Mr.
it's
Francais?
Global News,
Mr.
CHCH,
Carney said
and
that I
Radio
voted for
Canada,
the
Canadian Press,
Official Languages Act bill. The money comes from the previous bill, and the
and a lot of
official language
regional,
minority community money
local,
comes from
independent
the,
corporate
from the
media.
bill. I was asked to bring changes. We brought the
All right,
changes.
I come to the
we
future. I jumped
voted
out
for,
to
but
see
we
back
didn't
in the
want
last
to apply to
crash.
Quebec
The
because
winner
it
of the
harms
debate
Quebec.
is
Gentlemen?
yes, whoever you wanted to win going to the debate.
Nope. Things didn't turn out perfectly, but Mr. Singh, you say you got 22 minutes compared to 24, 24, 25. Roughly equitable. I'm sorry that I did have to cut off your.
That
mic,
does
but
really
I'd like
well.
to
Yeah, it does
wish
seem
all
like
four of you good luck with the rest of the campaign.
not really roughly
and I hope
equitable.
that we'll see your costed plans as soon as possible, so that we can see how much all of your promises will cost. And I hope that everyone listening tonight will be able to make an informed decision now. Voting starts this weekend,
And the game.
and the match. I don't know.
Match started about an hour ago.
Starts the
Wait, I just want to take a
plan,
screenshot of that.
But I'd like to wish 5 roughly equitable, but Mr. Singh, you. So you got 22 minutes compared to 24, 24, 25, all four of you, so that we can being with.
To our special coverage after the debate. We are live in Montreal where the leaders just faced off for the very first time in this campaign. Good evening, I'm Adrienne Arsenault. We are just outside the Maison de Radio-Canada. Inside that building behind me is where the only French language debate of this campaign just took place. Certainly seemed pretty spirited, some pretty good lines on offer. We're still keeping a very close eye on what's going on in there because in just a few minutes, each leader will take questions from reporters. So you're going to see all of that right here, live. You're going to be exactly where you need to be. And you're in pretty good company because alongside me for the ride tonight, Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton and the host of Power and Politics,
Who will be free
David
in
Cochran.
50
We'll
years.
also hear from at issue, even though it is not Thursday.
Sorry,
I know the
what did I
days
miss?
can blur in this moment. Rosie and David, Rosie, start with you. Gut response to what you heard. What stood out?
It was not
Of course they
a
did this
chaotic
outside.
debate. It was not
Of
a debate
course.
where people interrupted people too much. It
Why?
Was a debate
Why
where
would
if
you
were
do this
watching
outside?
and listening, you would have got some clarity on people's positions, and I think you would have understood where they're coming from. It is not surprising, I wouldn't think to anybody, that Mark Carney was under attack from all sides tonight. Yves-François Blanchet really went after him on multiple accounts, but I was very surprised too by the energy of Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet Singh came out swinging on going after the Conservatives and Liberals, picked on Mark Carney multiple times, and we'll get to some of the examples, but he actually was more aggressive than I expected. Mark Carney did fine, I think is how I would say it.
In what sense? Fine.
I think that he struggled sometimes to get into the debate because of the language. Not that it's a barrier, but it's a bigger obstacle for him. So I think he got better as the course of the debate went on. And Pierre Poilievre, if people were expecting to see the attack dog that we are used to seeing in Parliament, that is not who we got tonight. We got someone who was more calmly litigating his points and his policies, and we can go over some of the differences because there were some stark differences on pipelines, on immigration, on the CBC, on sovereignty of this country. So we can go through some of those, but those are sort of my initial thoughts in terms of tone and approach. Did this change anything, which is always the question? I'm not sure that it really substantially moved anything, but we can talk more about what that might mean.
Some good lines. I mean, right out of the gate, I think there were some. Jagmeet Singh called the Bloc Québécois as useless as the monarchy. Yves-François Blanchet got some lines in there calling Mark Carney's math, equivalent to Harry Potter financial framework. So, they're trying for the lines. So a little spicy, but not that much.
Well, look, first of all, on the big issue that's dominating Quebec, the Canadiens and the Hurricanes are tied at 1 at the end of the first period.
Thank you for that.
This is why we're on earlier because of this. But look, I think I agree with Rosie a little bit. Like, there are some contrast points and things being differentiated. What you talked about there with Jagmeet Singh going after Mr. Blanchet, saying you're as useless as the monarchy. These are two parties getting squeezed out of a very binary national election. The Bloc being sidelined in Quebec the way the NDP is being sidelined in English Canada, both trying to make the pitch for another minority parliament with them having the balance of power. It's a very difficult argument to make in an election that is so polarized broadly between the Conservatives and the Liberals, with the Donald Trump factor overshadowing everything. But what Jagmeet Singh is trying to do there to voters in Quebec and francophones outside of Quebec is that the NDP actually has a list of achievements to put on the table as a player in a minority parliament. They delivered some things through the supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, and they're making the point that the Bloc can't. It hasn't. And this sort of leads into the sort of...
Bernardo, yeah.
is that conservatives won't, the Bloc can't, and this is where we come in. And,
Yeah, no,
this is the challenge for Carney in this in terms of making
the CBC doesn't have to abide by liberal bail laws, so yeah.
In this country is under attack from everybody. I agree with Rosie.
Cochran's on a life sentence, no opportunity for parole.
Because he has fights in every direction.
He's stuck.
Right?
He's stuck behind that desk wherever they put it.
Red-orange fights in British Columbia, where they're fighting for party status.
Hey, not a bud. How are you?
Alexandre Boulerice here in Montreal to maybe get Ruth Ellen Brousseau or Craig Sauvé to join them in the House of Commons as Quebec MPs. He has to fight on every front with the fewest resources and some of the lowest polling numbers and in a tough political environment. And he's going to use every stage he can use to do it. And he also is desperately, as you saw throughout this debate, trying to put healthcare front and center. This is an issue the NDP believes they're associated with, going back to Tommy Douglas with dental care and pharmacare. He wants that issue, and they're even getting into it with Patrice Roy at the end, saying, "You cut me off every time."
Well, that was interesting. That's where he was especially angry at appearing to be, in his mind, shortchanged on the time because he was trying.
He was by a couple of minutes too, and you saw the tally at the end. He got the least amount of time of everybody.
But healthcare wasn't one of the topics, right? And he was clearly not happy with that. And Patrice Roy said, "We will let you talk about it." But that is because Jagmeet Singh is trying to justify why he propped up a Liberal government for so long. The justification is, we got you this program and this program. And if Canadians and Quebecers can't understand that claim, then it becomes very difficult for him to make the argument that anyone should vote for him at all.
Which is why he tries to wedge it into every theme. You know, identity. It's fundamentally about healthcare in his explanation. Okay, so Ashley Burke. While we were here watching, Ashley Burke has been watching the debate with us. Ashley, this is the very first time these four leaders have faced off in this way. Certainly, we've never seen Carney and Poilievre face off together.
Yeah, Adrian, and Liberal leader Mark Carney had the most at stake. He's leading in the polls along with the Conservatives leader. It was his first time on stage at a federal leaders debate, and that made Carney a target. He came under attack from everyone.
You're just like Justin Trudeau. You have exactly the same policies, the same approach. We need change. And you, Mr. Carney, you do not embody change.
You represent the ultra-rich.
Mr. Poilievre is not Justin Trudeau. I'm not Justin Trudeau either, okay? In this election, the question is, who is going to succeed? Who is going to face Mr. Trump?
Same parties, same ministers, same caucus, same ideology, same hostility against Quebec. It's not just because the leader changes that the philosophy will magically change overnight.
And we saw Carney speaking carefully and deliberately, but it was clear that he was the most uncomfortable. He was the least comfortable on stage in French, and he had to defend himself, including how he's going ahead with his promise to reduce government's operational spending without reducing transfers to provinces for things like healthcare.
These are Harry Potter financial frameworks. You need a lot of magic to make it work. There needs to be more money, but we're going to do cuts. They want to be more conservative than the Conservatives.
So no tax cuts.
We've started with the cost of living. We have to cut taxes for the cost of living.
What Mr. Blanchet said is true. You were talking about a magic spell here, Mr. Carney. This is one rare moment where we agree. On February 16th, you sat down with Rosemary Barton and you said that you would cut spending in the operating budget.
Operational spending. That's different.
You said...
One at a time, please.
That this would affect transfers for healthcare and to individuals.
No, we need to catalyze private investment in our economy to create new and good jobs. That's the first thing we need to do. In terms of transfers to provinces for healthcare, yes, there are limits to the federal government's activity. No new programs. No.
So, Ashley, Donald Trump's trade war with Canada, huge part of the debate tonight.
Yeah, and all the leaders made their case why they believe they're the best person to take on Donald Trump. And we saw NDP leader Jagmeet Singh go after Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, trying to suggest that he's like Trump.
No one will be able to control the decisions of Donald Trump, but we can control our economy, our domestic economy, by overturning liberal economic policies that have weakened our country and made us more dependent on the Americans.
The issue is, Mr. Poilievre, you would make Canada more like the United States. You would Americanize our healthcare system, privatize it.
The leaders were also asked what American products they're no longer buying during this trade war.
I buy Quebec strawberries and I do my own shopping, by the way.
What products have you not bought, Mr. Carney?
No more wine, no more alcohol, no more American alcohol.
I do my own shopping, and I cook at home. Lots of products, fruits.
It's beef, in my case. I buy Canadian beef. It's the best beef in the world. But I never buy American strawberries either.
The leaders will continue their conversation tomorrow when they square off again, this time in English.
All right, Ashley, thanks very much. Just a reminder to everyone, we're keeping an eye on what's happening in the building behind us because we're still waiting to hear from the leaders tonight. They will all go to the podium. They will all do a bit of a scrum. There'll be a bit of a break between each of them. We anticipate that will start in about 5 minutes. When they do speak, of course, we'll bring it all to you live. But for now, Rosie, you got name checked in there in that debate. That's always awkward a little bit.
Yeah, I'm never sure I want to be name checked. But we will bring in some of our best political minds here, the at issue panel, to get some sense of what they thought. Just a quick go round from Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and
I don't
see all
think.
Of you. We'll come back and do a full takeout of things. But I want to start with your first impressions. It was certainly
I didn't really think
more
about
polite
that.
than some debates we've seen in the past. So I do feel like if you were watching at home, Chantal, you would actually get.
I'm pretty sure probably most of the meat
But give me your sense.
I probably eat. Well, I mean, that depends on where you're like if it's prepackaged stuff. Like if you're getting like fresh like beef from the butcher, most likely it's probably almost all going to be probably Canadian beef.
And second, while everyone drove their points home, he really did not get cornered in the way that some might have expected. Do I expect this debate to be a game changer in Quebec? No, I don't.
Yeah, and I would also say that Mr. Carney actually improved a little bit, I noticed too, as things went on, and he seemed to better understand how to get into the debate, which might help him tomorrow when he's speaking in his first language. Andrew, do you think it changed anything substantively or otherwise?
I can't see it changing very much. I agree with Chantal that Carney, as we often say, won by not losing. I think there were a number of factors at play there. One was he had very low expectations going in about his French, so simply showing up and having reasonably competent French, he may have surprised some people. Secondly, the rules, the very orderly, civilized, rules without so much back-talking. In a debate where you're in your second language, he could really have been overwhelmed if there had been a lot of people talking over him. He was spared from that.
Sure.
Thirdly, some of the most treacherous issues were reserved for the second half of the debate after presumably a large part of the audience had deserted. So notwithstanding clause versus language, pipelines, etc., where he had to step really carefully. I don't think he made any serious errors there, but the first part of the debate was all about Trump, and that was, has been his strong point. And the final point I would say is the biggest thing he's got going for him in Quebec, which, let's face it, this debate is mostly about voters in Quebec, is that the vote is very evenly split right now between the Bloc and the Conservatives. And unless and until that changes, unless one of the leaders or those two leaders have gotten really far ahead of each other and gained from this debate, then the Liberals are going to be in a very strong position with the vote so evenly split between their rivals in Quebec.
Okay, and let's get Althea's take, and maybe on that, Althea, I'm not sure that happened either. That Pierre Poilievre knocked it out of the park, or that Monsieur Blanchet did either. They both did well, but I'm just not sure that they did any damage to Mr. Carney in any way.
Well, Mr. Poilievre tried his best to make in the room be Justin Trudeau and not Donald Trump, and I don't think that he was successful with that. I agree with everybody else. I think Mark Carney basically walks out of there unscathed. I think if you're a Liberal, you're very happy tonight.
See, here's the thing, though.
Performance. There was
I think Poilievre probably did the best, but I don't know if that counts as a win. Because for him to win, I think he had to get
then at the end, kind of weird
Mortal Kombat fatality sort of moment on Carney.
And he lacked the
and maybe it's maybe the
of the language was a lot
so it may have gotten lost in translation, but I don't know if I caught
he also benefited by the fact that, frankly, Yves-François Blanchet and Jagmeet Singh
you should apologize to Canadians
attacked
moment
Mr.
Rooney pulled off or
strongly,
something.
And they did Mr. Carney's job for him, so Mr. Carney could be that kind of calm, dad-like, boring person on the sideline. While you
just got to do who you think did best.
So he benefited from
spelled Poilievre wrong.
Stage the debate format as well, for sure.
Got Blanchet correct.
Mr. Carney's going to be up in his scrum in just a minute.
It's only.
Do you think that Mr. Blanchet?
It's only one L. The first L should be an I, but you know what? I think that's basic. That's all. That's not even
when they feel threatened. But
I'll just imagine you accidentally made that a capital I.
What you said when they feel threatened. And Mark Carney
no Leighton Zinger. There was no that moment
very much on Pierre Poilievre, and that
investments. So that economic approach.
There was the same moment where Trudeau's like, I'm proud of my father moment, which I think was I think that was at the Monk debate.
And certainly uncertainty in Canada.
That was a pretty strong moment.
What we need is to be.
He's losing the polls ever.
Bold in
I like that 1-0 Musk
policies.
Gold Star.
And as I always say, we are masters in our own home. And Mr. Poilievre is saying the same thing right now. That's fine. But we have an opportunity to really build the strongest economy in the G7. And I intend to do that. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Carney, Kean Bexty, Juno News. In your estimation, was Justin Trudeau a good prime minister?
Justin Trudeau and the previous administration made a number of contributions to this country. I suspect since I have 10 minutes, I think, right, for the responses, I'm not going to enumerate them all. I'll make one point which I think is relevant on the way looking forward, which is As I said the other night in an interview, he and we share the same values in terms of solidarity, taking care of one another, the emphasis on reconciliation, emphasis on equality of all Canadians.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, also, I mean, no, I think they were supposed to start at 8:15.
One of the differences, there are many, but one of the differences between the two of us goes to the question I was just asked, which is I put much more emphasis on the economy, on growing the economy. In fact, in this circumstance that we're in, given the scale of the crisis and what needs to be done, I would say a relentless focus on growing the economy to work for all Canadians.
Just to follow up, if I may, your entire campaign does seem to be predicated on putting you in the front and hiding the people that stood in lockstep with Justin Trudeau for the last 10 years. You're kind of hoping that Canadians won't connect the
What was
dots
his
that the
flub
people
on
standing
Radio
behind
Canada?
you in your
Did Carney
caucus
have a flub?
walked in lockstep with him. Regardless of what you say right now, Stephen Guilbeault made the carbon taxes life work.
Oh, you mean Poilievre's answer on Radio Canada?
Security prison is now your
Because his flub almost gives away the game that he might not actually be that committed to protecting Radio Canada.
I'd say a couple things to that rather odd question. First is that the candidates in this election for the Liberal Party, I mean, you go and see when I make an announcement. I don't think I've seen you at any of them, but next time you can come. And you will see a wide range of the candidates.
That's 100% a joke Carney made about the fact that Keenan Becks has been basically banned from any sort of Carney event. Like anytime Juno News or Rebel News tries to get in, they just don't let him in, which is snarky Carney.
And Natalie Provost, who is a new candidate. We're honored to have her, and someone who's dedicated their life to helping to end gun violence and violence against women. There is a very wide range of candidates that have come to the party with me. There's a lot of fresh blood. There's also a lot of experience that's there, and you need that combination of energy, new ideas, experience, and a fundamental passion for making this country better. In order to serve at this crucial time. Thank you very much.
Question en français.
Émilie Bergeron, la presse canadienne.
You said during the debate that you want to set a cap on immigration in some categories. Mr. Trudeau already went through an exercise of reducing annual immigration levels. How much more will you reduce them by? Well, my idea is more about maintaining the levels to a higher level for a fairly lengthy period of time, but at the same time increasing our capacity.
We keep if I may, the various measures or levels of the different classes of immigration as roughly as they are today. So it's not, as the question was, a further reduction, but we probably are going to need them to keep them at those levels for longer until we have built up our capacity to welcome, which means housing, language formation, other factors.
You
said you want to increase the production of oil. You are open to pipeline projects from east to west. That could take years to build a pipeline. So how can you present that as a way for Canada to be more independent of the United States if it takes years before it can see the light of day? Well, first of all, there are a couple of aspects to that. If we have an improvement in our relations, well, I think we need to be thinking of the immediate term, the midterm, and the long term. What you're talking about involves the medium term. And the fact that as Canada we have that option, that will increase or strengthen our position in our negotiations with the President of the United States. And that's very helpful right now.
Last question, if we can keep the answers and question very short, please.
Absolutely. Alex Zoltan with True North. If you thought my friend's question was odd, you're going to love this one.
I'm glad you self-assessed that. Okay.
How many genders are there? In terms of sex, there are two. Thank you. My follow-up question then, do you believe that women, biological women, have the right to their own spaces, their own sports, their own change rooms, their own prisons, their own homeless shelters?
I think we...
Just to clue everybody in, the debate commission had originally said that you can
general
they asked you to
objective, yes.
consider space and only send only the reporters you needed, but
but
you'd only get
we
one
work,
question
in,
per outlet.
where we
Rebel News
value
has
all
gamed the
Canadians,
system and
for
allowed
who they
themselves
are,
to get
and,
5
we'll continue
reporters
do
to
so.
be able
Thank
to
you very
ask a
much.
question by basically
Mr.
saying they're all in different distinct divisions, which is just very upsetting and very annoying.
Okay, so that was the 10 minutes of Mark Carney, the Liberal leader. His job for tonight is done. He focuses now on the English debate.
They're like, well,
tomorrow. We have a
CBC
few
gets
minutes before
2 because they have
Jagmeet Singh is next up at the
CBC and
podium.
Radio
Obviously,
Canada.
we'll bring you that live.
And Post Media
We'll
has
go
a
to
bunch
David
of different
Kaufman first.
outlets.
Started off talking about costing,
As you
went
can see,
into
I'm not
identity
exactly
politics, but the costing part was
impressed with the decision.
Yeah, so we do not yet have a fully costed platform from the Liberal Party. We're going to get that, as I understand it, Saturday. That's when that is going to happen. But you saw there the $500 billion number over 5 years that Mark Carney is talking about. He liked to use the word catalyzing. You know, he used that a lot tonight in French. What they're talking about there, that's not necessarily $500 billion in new government spending. That is $500 billion they think they can unlock and leverage through housing accelerator money, infrastructure investment money, things that bring in private sector investment or matching funds from lower orders of government like provincial and municipal governments to start building up economic resiliency and housing and things like that across Canada. I think what you're seeing there, Adrian, that's going to be their closing argument language. It's about investing in Canada for Canadians and building in Canada. And I think that maybe tactically, strategically is why they've kept the platform back until after the debates so they can drop that and have that sort of shape what they want to talk about in the stretch run of the campaign. But that has been very much his focus of unlocking capital in the country to invest in things for economic resilience. And that's what that $500 billion over 5 years are talking about. It's all about there.
That's a line he keeps repeating, the sort of investing, not spending.
Yeah, and look, there's a way they're looking at the federal budget. He says invest more, spend less. As I understand that, on the basic structure of government, the size of the bureaucracy, the daily operations, they want to reduce the cost of that over time. It's growing at about 9% a year. They think that's too fast. They want that to get to a balanced level without cutting transfers to individuals like OAS and pensions, without cutting transfers to provinces like healthcare. Where they say they're willing to borrow and run deficits is on that catalyzing side, to use his phrase. Borrow money for infrastructure, for housing investments. If it's creating an asset or generating economic activity, they consider that good debt.
Right.
If it's just paying for the basic operations of government, they consider that bad debt. The things they say they're not going to cut are the transfers to the provinces to pay for healthcare and education and transfers to individuals.
Right. I think we're about 40 seconds away, maybe, if it's on time, from seeing Jagmeet Singh at the podium. But Rosie, I'm curious what stood out to you, because at one point when some of those last questions came up, I just checked to make sure, no, we're in Canada. Because the identity politics questions have not emerged much.
This happens on the same day that the United Kingdom court ruled that woman and sex refer to biological woman and biological sex. True North is a very right-wing website, and there have been issues in the past with who gets allowed into these scrums and who's allowed to ask questions of the leaders. The commission, Debates Commission, was the one who decided.
Before that, you were a provincial member, and you have spent much of your career having your salary paid by the public. But you decided to boycott the Conservatives and others, and you supported Justin Trudeau's bill on the internet. Now, this is paid by all Canadians. Why do you think it's ethically acceptable to marginalize Conservatives and to refuse to treat them with respect? I will not answer your question from Rebel News, so I will not take that question. But I will take the time to say that for me, what is critical in this election is the issue of who will fight for Canadians, who will defend the things that people hold dear, such as health care, who will
I'm going to lose my
defend the
mind.
interests of everyday Canadians and
I'm gonna
not
lose
rich
it.
CEOs, and who will be
I was
able
explaining
to
that True
stand
North
up
is
to
separate from
companies that
Rebel.
rip Canadians off.
True North is basically like a Manning Center,
So you'll have to listen to me again.
more Western conservatism.
You feel that the Indians feel that your opinions are not acceptable, and you refuse to answer questions from journalists with whom you disagree, as you've just done now. I presume that in your opinion, we should be punished one way or another. So how are you any different from authoritarian politicians?
This is
that
Alex
you would
Lavoie.
imprison for their ideas? This is another reason why I do not take questions from Rebel News, because you
It's not
promote,
5 Rebel outlets, it's 5
disinformation,
Rebel
and your
News reporters.
question
They
is an
all work for
example
the
of
same
that.
outlet.
Good evening, Mr. Singh. Kate,
Do you really want it in English? I could do it if you want. No, you're just joking.
Next question.
Kate McKenna from CBC News. Your party and the other parties haven't released costed platforms. How can we have an honest debate about your promises when voters can't see how you'll pay for them?
No, they
We're
don't.
the
What?
only party that has actually laid out clear examples of how we would raise money. We talked about ending offshore tax havens, enforcing the Canada Revenue Agency to get the money that we're owed. There's billions and billions, tens of billions of dollars that we're owed that we're not receiving because of a lack of enforcement. So we've laid out clear ways that we would increase revenue. We've also talked about things that we would cut. We would cut offshore tax havens, but we'd also cut fossil fuel subsidies.
All 5 of the
and
reporters
private
Rebel News
consultants,
sent
and
work for
instead
Rebel.
rely on our civil servants. So we've laid out some of the real ways
They're
that we
his
would do
reporters. That was
Whereas,
part of his
the
sort of
conservatives are very
thing
clear what
that
they're
he
gonna
wrote
do.
up.
They're going to cut the services that people need. They've laid that out. And we've also seen that
He argued that they
Mr.
worked
Carney's
for
also
5
talked about
distinct
cutting
divisions of
services,
Rebel
and
News.
his plan to balance the operating budget in 3 years
Because
would
they
mean
work in different
$43 billion
regions.
in cuts. And so if you want someone that's going to stand up and fight back against those cuts, hold the Liberals to account. You need to send New Democrats
But
to
every
Ottawa like you
single
did before. and we were able to
reporter that
deliver
Rebel
dental
News
care
sent
and
is a
pharmacare.
reporter that works
Send
for
more
Rebel
New
News.
Democrats again to Ottawa, and we will fight back against
And
these cuts.
identify
You
themselves as
spoke
Rebel
the
News
least
reporters.
this evening of all of the leaders. I'm wondering how you feel about how you did tonight, whether you were able to communicate your message to French-speaking Canadians.
Well, ultimately, the difference wasn't as big, but initially I was worried about it. But I'm really proud that I was able to make the case to Canadians, to Quebecers, or French-speaking Canadians, that what New Democrats are going to do is stand up for what matters most to you. I made it a point to stand up for healthcare because it is so fundamental to who we are as a country. We fundamentally believe that we should take care of each other, and healthcare represents that value. So I raised that. I talked about how we can make life more affordable by putting a price cap on essential food items like other countries have done. I talked about how we can stop big corporations, corporate landlords from buying up affordable homes. I laid out how we would take the GST off of your monthly bills like cell phone and internet and give people a real break. And so in this difficult time, the question in this election is who's going to actually fight for you, not the billionaires, and sending more New Democrats to Ottawa. Voting for us is how you have someone on your side fighting for you.
Question en français.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Hello, Mr. Singh, Radio-Canada. We heard you referred to fair treatment from the moderator. Why did you attack the moderator in this debate? Well, it was just in the moment. I spoke to him after the debate, and I said it was because I was very passionate about the issue. Health care is something that saved my father's life. I had to access it while I was studying law, so I think it's really fundamental to defend our healthcare system. It's such a personal thing. So I was passionate about it, and I had an opportunity to share why it's important to defend it, because there's a crisis right now, and this is a crisis we can fix. So I think people in Quebec and across the country
Bex works for Juno News. That's separate.
How important that is to me to defend
Keen
something
Bex is
that
not one
people
of the
hold
5
dear.
reporters that
In the
Rebel
debate,
News sent.
You accused of
Keep
Pierre
up,
Poilievre
Nato,
of
bud.
wanting to privatize health care. What evidence do you have of that?
Keen Bex works for Rebel News, or works
healthcare.
for Juno
He is
News,
proposing to
which is
massively
more of the
cut
Manning
programs
Center.
that we need. And like all conservatives,
school of thought
if
of
you look at the
conservative
record
right-wing,
of the conservatives in the
media
past,
outlets.
they privatize.
Well,
In
Rebel
each
News is more
province
of
where there are
the,
conservatives. In a province
Ontario
where,
Harper
like
conservatives.
Alberta with Danielle Smith. And Danielle Smith
I'm just making that
is
up.
currently massively privatizing the
two separate
healthcare
things.
system in Alberta. She is giving power. But I'm talking about Mr. Poilievre. But she's giving a lot of power to private organizations. So this is an example of conservative values, which involves privatization. And Mr. Poilievre is continuing that same tradition with massive cuts to health care. And those cuts will accelerate privatization.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. Your party takes great pride in standing against hate such as white supremacy, Islamophobia, and online...
Sorry, I didn't get your outlet.
Drea Humphrey with Rebel News.
Okay.
Your party...
You know where I'm going to go with this, all right?
At least you warned her.
Yeah, you can. I'm just going to say you know where I'm going to go with it, though.
Your party takes pride in standing against hate such as white supremacy, Islamophobia, and online hate speech. Yet you stay silent about ongoing attacks against Christians, even after conservative MP Jamil Javani's order paper question revealed that over 200 churches have been targeted by arson and vandalism since claims of remains being discovered at former residential schools swept the nation in 2021. These claims have been disproven by bands that excavated and remain unproven by those that have not. Will you condemn the rise in acts of hate against Christians today and explain what your party will do moving forward to keep Christians safe from hate in Canada?
Again, thank you, but I'm not going to respond to an organization that promotes misinformation and disinformation like Rebel News, so no, I'm not going to respond to your question.
Please keep the questions and answers short. We're just getting up to the time.
Perhaps you didn't hear me. Over 200 Christian places of worship have been attacked in Canada since 2021. Many served First Nations communities, many were historic, and they diverted police and resources and put others at risk. What do you say to Canadians who see your refusal to answer, especially from one of the few media outlets here that are not funded by the state, as proof that a vote for you is a vote for a dangerous radical party that gaslights the public into thinking it stands against hate when its silence is instead emboldening Christophobia?
Your question is another example of why I don't respond to agencies like Rebel News that promote misinformation and disinformation.
Très rapidement, une question en français et une suivie avec des réponses courtes, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour, Maïsem Sarawi pour La Converse.
Pour La Converse.
Pour quelle organisme?
La Converse.
La Converse.
La Converse.
Oui. C'est un média indépendant à Montréal.
It's an independent media organization.
So now they're all scared that they
organizations are fighting for asylum speakers, and many believe that Canada should remove itself from the Safe Third Country Agreement. And Trump is now removing people from the country. Do you believe that Canada should remove itself from the Safe Third Country Agreement? Now I have a bit of a challenge. So I will answer that question. I think the question is about compassion. If we're talking about crises involving people, we're talking about people who want to cross the border because they're afraid of what will happen to them in the United States. And in that case, I think we have to show compassion to them. For a long time, the federal government has not properly funded or given adequate resources to help with receiving people who are crossing the border illegally. And I've said in the past that we have to suspend that agreement because given the current situation with everything that's happening in the United States under Donald Trump, the fact that he's violating human rights very often, and recently with the Supreme Court decision that he has decided to ignore, we're talking about a dangerous situation for some people, and we should respond with compassion. And I maintain my position of suspending that agreement.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Merci. Thank you.
Okay, so that was NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Up next will be Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. But I think we have to sort of address the elephant in the room. How are these people chosen to answer these questions? And I don't know if either one of you have an answer for that, but I think there will be people at home saying, some of these seem like odd questions. Some of them aren't getting answered. How come we've heard so often from this one particular outlet? Any idea what's going on there?
There's three right-wing, very right-wing media, we can call them media, websites that are present in there. They get in line to ask a question like anybody else. Their accreditation has been approved by the Commission of Debates, and so they get the right to stand in line and ask a question that they choose to ask. In this case, you saw Mr. Singh, and this has been his position for some time, to refuse to answer questions. Rebel News in particular traffics in misinformation, facts, lack of facts, and as you heard in that question, which was woven with some truth and some things that weren't true. Yes, there have been burnings of Christian Catholic churches. Yes, there have been remains of Indigenous children found in various places around the country, which she misrepresented. We'll see if Mr. Poilievre gets any questions from right-wing organizations. I would suspect no.
Okay. All right, let's have a listen. Pierre Poilievre.
When you talk about protecting the French language outside Quebec,
No, yeah, he threatened to sue this time.
access to immersion.
He sued the last two
What are you
times.
promising to a lot of students who have no room in those schools because there aren't enough francophone schools being built outside Quebec? Are you pledging to support the construction of more schools? Thank you for that question. When I was a young person in Calgary, I was able to attend an immersion school where my father was also a teacher. So this is something that is very important to me, and I know there's a lot of demand. Obviously, management of schools
He's
is
gaming.
a
He just
provincial
it just
area of
games
jurisdiction.
the system.
They are the ones that control which schools are established in which communities, and I'm prepared to work in full cooperation with the provinces to ensure that that access can be expanded. Now, I made an announcement previously about an immersion program that would allow young people to go to Quebec, to the Saguenay and other places in Quebec where there's a large concentration of francophones. Just speaking French and being in immersion for 5 weeks, I did that when I was about 20 years of age, and I announced that I would double the funding of that program so that we can have more Anglophones right across Canada to go to Quebec and get involved in immersion programs and begin to achieve the necessary proficiency. Now, with respect to francophone immigration outside of Quebec, Mr. Carney announced a target of 12%. What target are you proposing? Well, I think that is a reasonable target, and I agree with him, and our party has already said that we are in favor of expanding the number of francophone immigrants coming to Canada, including outside of Quebec, so that we can add greater demographic weight to the French language in Canada. So we will work in full cooperation with the communities to expand the number of francophones who come to Canada and make Canada their home. Thank you.
Sheila Gunn-Reid for Rebel News.
Yes.
We've seen the NDP tonight refuse to take questions from independent journalists. The Liberals have gone one step further. The Carney campaign has called the police on independent journalists. Trudeau before that brought in C-18, C-11. The Liberals are promising a revamped version of the Online Harms Act.
You shouldn't.
What would a Conservative government do to ensure the independence of the press and protect Canadians' right to have access to information and hold their politicians to account?
Okay, that one wasn't bad.
We are the only party that's
the
willing
last
to
few
protect,
questions have
freedom
been
of the
a
press,
mouthful.
all the media, and we will, we will also repeal C-11, the censorship law. We will remove the censorship of Canadian news on web platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and we will fight back against any kind of Orwellian online censorship law like the one that the previous Liberal government instituted It was designed to create the possibility of preemptive arrests of people, where you could be arrested if you were suspected of sometime in the future planning to say something harmful online. You could be under a peace bond. I mean, it really is Orwellian. And I note that many people across the spectrum have spoken out against this censorship. Even someone like Margaret Atwood, not known to be a conservative, has said that this kind of censorship is not only bad
Atwood's
for
come
democracy,
out
but
and like
its artistic expression. So I stand for free speech, and we will
refuted
respect the right of
this
Canadians
attack
to
line.
have
It's wild.
access to the media that they choose.
My follow-up, Canada's suffering the most violent anti-Semitic crime wave in history.
Yes.
There have been shootings, fire bombings, even a riot right here in Montreal. But not all of this anti-Semitic hatred and incitement rises to the high level of a criminal code offense. Do you believe that foreign nationals, that is, people who are not Canadian citizens, should be deported for participating in these hate marches or other pro-Hamas activities that don't rise to the level of a crime?
Well, what I have said is when there is a crime involved, including crimes of vandalism, that visitors to Canada should be deported. You simply can't come here and firebomb a Jewish bakery or someone's home or smash windows out of a political riot and expect to stay in this country if you are on a visitor visa. We will be bringing in tougher laws to penalize those who are permanent residents and citizens who break laws and harm our communities. But look, this is the disintegration we have witnessed after the lost Liberal decade. Everybody is divided. This group is divided against that group. There is crime and chaos in our streets. We will fight back against any kind of Orwellian
welcome to the stream, Josh.
Censorship law like the one that the previous Liberal government instituted. It was designed to create the possibility of preemptive arrests.
Wait, I just want to see, is this the third person?
Sure, the end of the
English, please.
Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News. Journalist Trudeau before
only part will
is this the same answer?
Previous media that
anti-Semitic crime with Montreal rises
questions.
who are marching.
Crime Canadian first and put foreign divisions behind us.
Thank you for taking my
Question
question.
en français, s'il
Thank
vous plaît. Please keep your questions and answers short. Thank you.
Christopher Curtis, The Rover. Monsieur Poilievre, plus tôt ce soir,
earlier this evening, Jagmeet Singh described what is happening in Gaza as a genocide. I imagine that's not your opinion, but since the Israeli government is talking about removing Palestinians from Gaza, is this more like ethnic cleansing? And do you think it's permissible to criticize Israel? Well, it's permissible to criticize anyone. However, Hamas attacked Israel with the mission of raping and killing as many citizens as possible. Israel had already ceded Gaza, and this was an unprovoked invasion. And unfortunately, there is a great deal of suffering among Palestinians, but the blame rests with Hamas. Hamas wants to maximize suffering among Palestinians in order to extend the conflict, to prolong the conflict. So I reject Mr. Singh's approach to this. We will remain true to those allies who are against terrorism.
You just ignored the actual question about the
bombs
plans.
fell on many universities and other institutions in Gaza. People there are not getting the help they need. Can you afford to criticize Israel, or do you believe they've done everything they should have done thus far?
dans une situation où un groupe
in a
terroriste
situation where a terrorist group
traverse la frontière
crosses the border
pour délibérément
to
cibler les
deliberately
enfants,
target
les femmes
children,
et les civils.
women, and civilians.
Un pays n'a aucun choix autre que
A country
de
has
se
no
défendre.
choice but to defend itself.
Est-ce qu'un tel pays devrait prendre tous
Should
les
that
efforts pour
country
éviter
make every effort
les tragédies
to
des autres
avoid
civils? Absolument.
tragedies affecting other civilians?
Malheureusement,
Yes.
Hamas
Unfortunately,
veulent se
Hamas
positionner
wants to
afin de
position
maximiser
itself in
les
order
pertes
to
de vie des
maximize
C'est Hamas qui a commencé
loss
la guerre
of life
et c'est Hamas
among
et les autres
Palestinians.
groupes terroristes
Hamas
qui maximisent
started
la
this war,
souffrance
and they
du
are
peuple
maximizing the
palestinien.
suffering
Merci,
of
Vincent.
the Palestinian people.
Merci beaucoup. That was the last question. C'est
Okay.
la dernière question. Merci.
Thank you very much.
Did he really manage to only take another 4 questions?
Okay, so that was Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Next up will be Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc. But just watching it, having watched the debate, David,
Yeah.
you know, it's the debate was one type of conversation. This feels very different.
I think the debate commission is going to need to be accountable for what's kind of happening here. They moved the time of the debate the day before. They kicked the Greens out the morning of, and they've opened up the scrums and the press access to a bunch of groups who sometimes are registered charities or have been defined by their owner as not actually a journalistic organization, or have been ruled by the federal court to not be a journalistic organization. And in an election like this one, with very substantive debate on very substantive issues, moderated very well and executed very well by all the leaders, this is where this is going. So look, the debate
Did that
commission was
Jamie
set up
Bugger
to make
still
this
on the-
stuff run in a professional, coherent way, shifting the time for a hockey game, kicking out the Greens about a problem that has been known about for a week, and now this. I think I would like an explanation as a journalist. I think a lot of people at home would like an explanation as to why it happens this way. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the English debate tomorrow? But we've seen this, that they're talking about. There was immigration questions in the debate, a consensus on living up to the Safe Third Country Agreement. Can you really do that with an administration like the Trump administration right now, where you send people back when the foundational principle of the Safe Third Country Agreement is people you deny access at your border are going to get due process and proper legal treatment in the country you're sending them back to, when people are just being snatched and they sent an American citizen to Central America and they're refusing to bring back. So there are substantive follow-ups on these things for these leaders. They only get 10 minutes, and it's being monopolized by people who are asking on issues that are not central to the campaign, and certainly were not central to this debate.
And we have about 30 seconds left. Anything of substance that you heard there, policy-wise, or that you've heard tonight that you hadn't heard before?
Not in any of these scrums, because they are being taken over by other agendas, right? And not, I think, necessarily helping a broad swath of voters. Some people maybe do want to hear some of these questions and answers, but broadly, I don't think they represent sort of what the ballot box question is about. We can talk more, yeah.
All right, here's Yves-François Blanchet.
Oui. Et une question en français, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour, Monsieur Blanchette.
Hello, Mr.
Radio
Blanchet.
CKUC Montréal. À l'extérieur du débat
Now,
aujourd'hui, le Front
outside the
d'Action Populaire
debate,
pour
the
réaménagement
Front
urbain
d'Action
demande au
Populaire
parti de prendre
is
un engagement
asking the
concret
party
face
to
à la
make a
crise du logement,
concrete
notamment
commitment
en construisant
to
plus de
housing
500 000 nouveaux logements au
by
Canada, dont 100 000 au
building
Québec, au cours des 10
500,000 new homes over the next
Pouvez-vous
10
nous donner un
years.
chiffre aujourd'hui sur
Can
le
you
nombre
give
de
us a
logements
figure
sociaux que votre
today
parti
on the
s'engage à
number of
construire?
social housing units that your party would build? Well, it would be more than 100,000 in Quebec, but I cannot commit to build housing in Quebec because I am not intending to become Prime Minister of Canada. However, I do think we must build a lot of housing, hundreds of thousands of units, but I'm talking about student housing because it is the type of housing where you can house the most people. You can use affordable housing, but that's not the best formula, in my opinion, because you're funding or raising the value of private investments. Now, the idea is to counter speculation, and you can reduce that. But housing that is not commercial housing is the basis through which you can act. Now, the federal government has been actively involved in building social housing, but right now in Montreal, there is only 5% social housing. So I'm wondering whether, even if your party could not run the government, how would your party invest in social housing? Well, first of all, Quebec's jurisdiction must be respected, and I think it's important for everyone to respect the fact that the municipal level is in the best position to understand what the needs are and to choose the locations where social or student housing should be built. But, you know, when there are a number of little different levels of government that are involved, that is not necessarily the best system.
Good evening, David Menzies with Rebel News. Ms. Blanchette, since 1941, a pipeline has brought oil from Portland
And another Rebel News
to
question.
Montreal. Over the years, it has brought hundreds of millions of barrels of oil, much of it from OPEC dictatorships. Why have you never, not even once, opposed OPEC conflict oil being imported through an
I'm just going to
Asian
start
pipeline?
timing these
Why
questions.
do you prefer OPEC conflict oil over Alberta ethical oil?
I seem to believe that you already have the answer you want to write, so
I love
your question
Blanchette.
seems to contain the answer. I believe I am the one who authorized the change of direction in Enbridge Line B in 2013, which seems to prove that I'm not a fanatic against oil. But I believe that we've got to reduce our consumption of oil progressively, including from Alberta, because we are clearly being very expensive for every family in Quebec and Canada and destroying the whole planet. The denial of the reality of climate change since the beginning of this campaign and the change of heart of Mr. Carney, who decided to be more conservative than Mr. Poiliev, is very harmful for environment.
Mr. Blanchette, just to follow up on that question, your party and your stance on pipelines would seem to be diametrically opposed to Quebecers. A poll came out showing that 74% of Quebecers support the building of new pipelines. Why are you and your party not in sync with the majority of people in this province, sir?
Don't you know my love for commenting polls? Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Question en français, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour, M. Blanchet.
Hello,
Il est
Mr.
qu'entraîne
Blanchet.
The Hub. Depuis le
The
7
Hub,
octobre 2023,
since
la communauté
October
juive fait face à une
7th,
vague
the
alarmante
community,
d'erreurs
the Jewish community has been facing a wave of attacks against it.
6,219 attaques
There have been over 6,000 anti-Semitic events in 2024, fire bombings, attacks against schools. Pierre,
is this Rebel News again?
Poilievre has said that any
Thank you.
The Hub
Oh, it's the Hub.
involved in this kind of event.
I'm
Do
just
you
tracking
believe
how
that
many
a
questions the
permanent
Rebel News
resident
gets.
should have the right to stay in Canada? Anyone who is in Canada must abide by Canadian laws. But as I said, we're in a very difficult situation right now. In Quebec and in Canada, the Jewish community has been the subject of violence from Islamist radical organizations, whereas in Gaza, it's the Palestinian people, excluding Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that should be eradicated. The Palestinian people are subject to that violence. So the only real solution is a two-state solution through which, and this is the position that should be considered in terms of creating a Palestinian state. A number of Albertans are frustrated with the federal government and feel that Canada no longer works for them because they feel it's harming their prosperity. As leader of the Bloc, What do you think of the idea of Western sovereignty? I cannot comment on the desire of Albertans to be sovereign or not. A nation defines itself and would consequently have the right to self-determination. But the desire to fully develop oil reserves is the right of a province or a state.
Be better off fighting Trump alone?
I don't believe that anybody can be better off fighting Trump alone. I believe that we have to build alliance between equals. It means Canada and Mexico and European countries and Asian countries and Quebec. Canada does not have to be a province of Mexico to ally with Mexico against Trump. Quebec would not have to be a province of Canada to ally with Canada and Mexico against Trump. It won't happen in the coming months, of course, but the idea is for an economy. Quebec economy is different from Canadian economy, and it has to be treated accordingly. So far, all we have seen is efforts being deployed in order to protect Ontario economy, which is the way Canada defines itself. And nothing has been done when, let's say, lumberwood industry in Quebec has paid $2 billion in tariffs, specific kind of tariffs, which name in English I don't know, to the Americans. And it is to the industry, car industry, that Mr. Carney said that he would give $2 billion, nothing in Quebec. He even said that he had got $30 billion of tariffs, counter tariffs about aluminum. Nobody seems to know about that. Where does that come from, and where did the money go? There seems to be no such thing. The problem is that when Quebec aluminum goes to the United States and is transformed in the United States and comes back in Quebec with tariffs, we pay to use our own aluminum and inflict inflation on our own people. This is not the right way to manage the aluminum situation.
We've got less than 2 weeks left of this campaign. How are you going to convince Bloc voters who are considering voting Liberal to come back to you instead?
Exactly like I did tonight.
And what do you think was most convincing tonight?
I hope as much of it as possible was convincing. I'm not the one to decide about that. It belongs to the population of Quebec.
Une question courte, rapide en français, s'il vous plaît.
Le mot de la fin. Bonsoir, M. Blanchette. Simon Filiatro, Espace Autochtone à Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada.
Je pense pas que je vais vous prendre par surprise en vous annonçant
I don't think
que
I'll
les questions autochtones ont
surprise you
été très
when
peu
I say
abordées
that the
pendant le
indigenous
débat.
issues were
Alors,
not really
je vous demande,
addressed in the
quelle est la
debate.
place des questions
So
autochtones dans
I'd
votre
like to know
programme?
what
Comment
the
prévoyez-vous de faire
place
valoir
of
vos intérêts
indigenous
que
issues
parfois
is
semblent
in
diverger de
your
ceux du peuple québécois?
platform. Well, first of all, a couple of principles. I had noticed that the indigenous issue had been completely set aside when we were talking about culture. And I thought to myself, how is it that in the context of negotiating with the United States, and the 13 provinces and territories in Quebec, well, we have our own economy because, unlike what Mr. Carney has said, there are 13 economies, not one. But the indigenous nations are where around the table? These are full-fledged nations with the right to self-determination, and they could play a very worthwhile role in the negotiation. But that was not discussed at all, such as environmental issues. It was swept under the carpet, and you know, you granolas, you're not going to bug us with the environment. We need oil for Canada's sovereignty, whereas the Americans consider Canadian oil is already their property, and they don't feel guilty about that at all. And another thing that people don't take into consideration, including when it comes to energy, is the transmission of energy and also the green energy in Quebec. We could have a north-south
You guys are just watching basically a live stream
axis
of
for
how
that,
I do most of
but
my
they're
work.
they're
write while
focused on the
the news is
east-west
happening.
axis, and you know they can engage in all the polling that they want. I put Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney in the same bag. They'll be talking about Energy East and pipelines because there are people who are pretty much asleep on the environmental issue, but in Quebec that's not the case.
Merci.
On se voit demain. Merci.
See you tomorrow.
Okay, hands in pockets. There he goes. Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, the last one at the podium. There were only 4. There were supposed to be 5, but of course the Green Party was disqualified from the debates. But before we talk about the debates and the totality, any thoughts about Yves-François Blanchet?
Yeah, I mean, this was supposed to be a big moment for him. In the past 2 debates, he's managed to do some damage, and polls have increased anywhere from 5 to 7% after those debates. I'm not sure that was the case tonight. And again, that is really because the context is everything in this election. I do think we should maybe spend a bit of time talking about the pipeline issue, because it was, I thought, one of the stronger sections of the debate. It was one where you saw a stark contrast between where people sit on it, and it is, as Mr. Blanchet points out there, an issue of deep sensitivity to Quebecers. The idea that the pipeline would run through Quebec, as the previous Energy East pipeline was going to do. There has been a little bit of movement in the polls in terms of Quebec's support around that. Certainly the Premier has expressed a little more interest in it. But I think, Pierre Poilievre was asked numerous times, would you allow a pipeline to go ahead without provincial consent and without Indigenous consent? And his answer was sort of, well, as long as generally everybody agrees, then I would be fine. Mark Carney was not quite that broad. He does want to see big energy projects, maybe a pipeline, maybe something else, but he also wants to make sure that people are consulted. What they both have in common, though, is that they both want some version of one project, one review, which would mean that everyone would agree on the nature of the review that would happen and the project would start. And I think that's where, Alberta and provinces out west are very interested in seeing things move much more quickly, and where provinces like Quebec and others, where they would just see something run through it, are a little more skeptical about how this would work in practice.
I can tell you just from some of the conversations I've had across the country in the last little while, people are very confused about where the leaders stand on pipelines. Right. They're very confused, and they're confused about refining oil. They're confused about what can go where. I mean, Blanchet just talked about consulting the Indigenous communities. That has not come up a lot in this debate tonight. I mean, I think the pipeline question, it means a lot of different things to different people.
Right. I mean, broadly, just look, Blanchet basically against them, right? The NDP broadly against them. Pierre Poilievre broadly in favor. The issue that not an issue, the answer he gave tonight that could be a challenge for him in other parts of the country, because there's not a lot of real growth for him in Quebec, is that, he talked about a pipeline, that went along where there's a series of First Nations and Indigenous groups. He said about 80% were in favor, 20% were opposed, and in his view, in that case, majority rules. So that implies a willingness to impose a pipeline over some objections. That is going to be politically sensitive in certain parts of British Columbia, but that's also going to be politically popular in certain parts of British Columbia. What Mark Carney has talked about, and what Mr. Blanchet tried to squeeze him on there in the one part of the debate, was he talked about using the extraordinary powers of the federal government to make these big projects move along. Now, we saw a version of that with the TMX pipeline dispute between British Columbia and Alberta, where the John Horgan government was sort of getting in the way of a project that was legally and constitutionally allowed. So the federal government acquired it and turned it into a national project, which allowed them to override the province's objections to do it. When Mark Carney gave that first answer, he did it in French and in English, and didn't quite explain it the way he is saying it now, that he is not imposing. What he's talking about doing is using the extreme powers the federal government has to expedite approval and review process. So while he's not repealing Bill C-69, which the Conservatives refer to as the No New Pipeline Act, he's talking about using a component of it called the substitution policy, which basically you can let the province do the environmental review and the Indigenous review. You backstop them with money and expertise to bring it up to a consistent standard, so you can have one project, one review, and have it done fast. So he's talking about using the extraordinary powers of the federal government to move things along faster. He is not talking about using it to force it on an Indigenous group or province that does not want it, but you at least get it to that decision point as quickly as possible to remove the uncertainty, remove the delays, and let the company or the proponent or whatever who's behind it make a decision faster. There's still skepticism on this, because there are still members of his cabinet like Stephen Guilbeault and others that people in the energy sector say, yeah, Mark Carney may look at it differently, but does the rest of the Liberal team look at it differently? That's something they'll have to overcome.
Just a quick point is that the Liberals, again, are maintaining the cap on industrial polluters. They have removed it on consumers, on the consumer carbon tax. They killed that. But Pierre Poilievre has removed it entirely.
This is the price, not the cap, the price.
The price, sorry, the price.
Yeah.
So we don't really know how that would work for Pierre Poilievre. That's the piece that he hasn't cleared up.
Okay, in case you are just joining us, you're watching special coverage live from Montreal after the French language debate that happened right behind us at Maison Radio Canada. Four major party leaders just met on stage for the very first time in this campaign. The question now, will anything that happened tonight move the polls? So we know that At Issue is standing by with their thoughts. That is coming up in just a few minutes. First,
bonus At
let's
Issue.
check back in with Ashley Burke to bring us up to speed. Ashley, can you take us through what appeared to be the big moments of this debate? If there were big moments of this debate?
We're about to freeze, and I was going to lose my mind.
Adrian, Liberal leader Mark Carney had the most at stake. He is leading in the polls, and along with the Conservatives leader, it was his first time on stage at a federal leaders debate, and that made Carney a target. He came under attack from everyone.
You're just like Justin Trudeau. You have exactly the same policies, the same approach. We need change. And you, Mr. Carney, you do not embody change.
You represent the ultra-rich.
Mr. Poilievre is not Justin Trudeau. I'm not Justin Trudeau either, okay? In this election, the question is, who is going to succeed? Who is going to face Mr. Trump?
Same parties, same ministers, same caucus, same ideology, same hostility against Quebec. It's not just because the leader changes that the philosophy will magically change overnight.
Carney was the least comfortable in French on stage, but he kept up, didn't have any big missteps, and he was able to get his message across. Carney did have to defend how he's going to go ahead with his promise to reduce the government's operational spending without reducing transfers to provinces for things like healthcare.
These are Harry Potter financial frameworks. You need a lot of magic to make it work. There needs to be more money, but we're going to do cuts. They want to be more conservative than the Conservatives.
So no tax cuts.
We've started with the cost of living. We have to cut taxes for the cost of living.
What Mr. Blanchet said is true. You were talking about a magic spell here, Mr. Carney. This is one rare moment where we agree. On February 16th, you sat down with Rosemary Barton and you said that you would cut spending in the operational budget.
Operational spending. That's different.
You said,
one at a time, please,
that this would affect transfers.
It's like the sound of
healthcare and to
bees in the
individuals.
distance
We need to
underneath
catalyze
the
private
translator.
investment in our economy to create new and good jobs. That's the first thing we need to do. In terms of transfers to provinces for healthcare, yes, there are limits to the federal government's activity. No new programs. No.
Ashley, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that Donald Trump's trade war was kind of a big part of this debate tonight.
Yeah, Adrian, and all the leaders made their case why they believe that they're the best person to take on Donald Trump. And we saw NDP leader Jagmeet Singh go after Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, trying to suggest that he's like Trump.
No one will be able to control the decisions of Donald Trump, but we can control our economy, our domestic economy, by overturning liberal economic policies that have weakened our country and made us more dependent on the Americans.
The issue is, Mr. Poilievre,
Well,
you would make Canada more like the
That's not
United
true.
States. You would Americanize our healthcare system,
not true.
privatize it.
So, Ashley, we had this debate, and then the leader spoke post-debate in those scrums. What did you hear from those scrums?
The post-debate scrums were dominated by right-wing media groups who flooded leaders with questions on topics unrelated to the debate. One did ask Carney if he felt Trudeau was a good prime minister. Carney said that he was, and that they have shared values, including taking care of Canadians, reconciliation, and equality, but also said why he feels that they're different.
The difference, one of the differences, there are many, but one of the differences between the two of us goes to the question I was just asked, which is I put much more emphasis on the economy, on growing the economy. In fact, in this circumstance that we're in, given the scale of the crisis and what needs to be done, I would say a relentless focus on growing the economy to work for all Canadians.
The leaders will square off again on stage tomorrow, this time in English. Adrian?
All right, Ashley Burke in Ottawa. Thanks for that, Ashley. So absent from the stage tonight, no doubt you noticed, the Green Party co-leader, Jonathan Pedno. He was uninvited, if you will, by the Debates Commission at the very last minute, just after about 7 o'clock this morning. A decision he called, quote, unfounded and undemocratic.
This decision from the Debates Commission today does not protect democracy. It protects those who've already had their turn. It protects the ones who pave over the truth, who bulldoze through public interest and leave the rest of us to pick up the pieces. But here's what they forget. When they bulldoze, when they pave, green always grows, and it will keep on growing. So to those of you who may be frustrated and angry today, to those of you who wanted to see us on that stage, I say this: we will win. They tried to keep us off the stage, but they will not keep us off Parliament. We will win. We will protect Canadians and their future. Merci tout le monde. Thank you very much.
So David Thurton is on this part of the story for us tonight. David, you were there when Pedno made that statement. Looked very emotional for him.
Well, Adrian, before he gave his prepared remarks, reporters were told that he would not be taking any questions. So reporters like myself followed him down the street and yelled questions at him. Pedno was quite prepared to take the stage at tonight's debate, but he seemed less prepared to take questions from reporters who were asking him about what his next steps would be. It's hard to really know what recourse he actually has, Adrian, because of course, the French debates are over, and we're hours away from the English language debates.
So the decision from the Debate Commission, David, was sudden, but they were very clear that the Greens did not meet the requirements.
Yeah, they were quite clear, and the Commission has 3 requirements, and parties need to meet 2 of those criteria. I'll just walk you through some of those requirements. First up, parties have to have a seat in the House of Commons. The Greens have one. They also need to be polling at least 4%. The Greens are polling around 2%. And they need to be running in this election at least enough candidates in 90% of the ridings. And the Greens did not meet that criteria, that last one. In fact, we learned over the last couple of days that they decided to not run candidates in about 15 ridings for strategic reasons, Adrian, so that they didn't split the vote and get more Conservatives elected. Nevertheless, Jonathan Pedno, the Green Party leader, showed up tonight at this location where the debates are being held, and he blasted organizers.
This has been a difficult day for democracy, a sad day for democracy. We still haven't heard anything back from the Commission, but we took the day to gather more information as to what exactly happened, and it appears that the Commission caved in to pressure from other parties. Once again, I have to say once again that we met the criteria established by the Commission itself.
Adrian, the decision by the Commission is a major blow for the Greens. Debates like tonight's and tomorrow's are huge opportunities for parties like the Greens to get their message out there. And they have been struggling to get into the national conversation during this debate. And today was an important day for the Greens for another reason. They were supposed to drop their party platform this morning. Of course, that didn't happen. Needless to say, they postponed it, and we're hearing that they're gonna release it tomorrow.
All right. David Thurton right here in Montreal. Thank you, David. So let's take a minute now to really dig into what it is that makes the race for Quebec so important. With 78 seats up for grabs, Quebec holds a substantial amount of power. And right now, the CBC News poll tracker shows that weight is leaning Liberal. The party sitting at 42% of the popular vote, compared to about 23% for the Conservatives and 25% for the Bloc Québécois. Translated to seats, if the election was held today, the Liberals would win between 41 and 48. The Bloc, 15 to 23. The Conservatives 12 to 14, but those are still, of course, projections. And history proves Quebec can be a wild card. Let's take a trip back to 1984. Brian Mulroney's Progressive Conservatives cruising to a massive majority with a big assist from Quebec.
Le Bloc québécois est souverainiste.
Then in 1993, just after the formation of the Bloc québécois, that party immediately rode a wave of support to become the official opposition in their first general election.
Spring is here, my friends, and a new chapter begins.
Yeah, I mean, like...
Speaking of waves, an orange crush washed over the province less than 2 decades later.
Because that's the thing, is like,
Jack
the
Layton
Greens
become
kind of
leader
fucked
the
themselves, but
opposition.
they could, like, they had all of the paper candidates to do the 100%. But then they made, I would say, the strategic
Most recently,
error
Quebecers propelled
to
Justin
reduce that
Trudeau to
number
his only
in
majority
order
government
to
in
not split the
2015.
vote, but
So 4
thus
transformative elections,
making
4
them
different
ineligible
winners
to
in
be on the debate
province.
stage.
And in just 12 days, another chance to help determine Canada's future. All right, so let's talk about Quebec and all that it has to offer in its 78 seats. Anything that happened tonight likely to move any needles here?
I don't think so. Not in the
No,
dramatic
there was a
way that we
Green
saw
MP
in the
that
last
switched to the
election and even the
Liberals.
one previous to that. There were a couple of
Oh,
moments
God.
where the Bloc's
I
leader,
just had her
François
name.
Blanchet, who was the most experienced guy out there today, was able to land some punches, and we did see the polls shift. I don't think that happened today, despite the fact that Mr. Blanchet made some good points. He attacked Mark Carney for not being an experienced
Oh, okay.
politician.
Well, I
questioned
mean,
whether
I think
Mr.
Elizabeth
Carney would
May
be
won
able
her
to
seat in
defend Quebec's
2011.
interests at a table in front of Donald Trump. Said, how do I know that you're going to protect the aluminum industry the same way you'll protect the automobile industry in Ontario? All relevant, pertinent things that a lot of Quebecers might be thinking about. But I'm not sure that the answers did anything to change people's view. And that's because we are, as we've been talking about, in a different place right now. We're in a place where Quebecers, French-speaking Canadians, and others tomorrow are looking at not just who can protect their personal interests, but who can protect the interests of the nation in this time. And so that is where the conversation is. Jagmeet Singh also really tried to push through with some things, trying to suggest that the Conservatives and the Liberals are not there to protect workers, healthcare, that giving him just a number of MPs would make a difference inside the House of Commons. Then again, he was full of energy. He did well tonight. I just don't know that it really changes the conversation, which is very much one that is between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And on both those fronts, Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, I think, did no harm to either to themselves tonight, but did nothing substantial to change the way the race looks in Quebec right now either.
Certainly for Carney, the not doing any harm was probably the bar he needed to meet.
Yeah, look, last fall, I think it was last fall, the Liberals lost a by-election in Le Salamar-Verdun, which is that was Paul Martin's riding at one point. It was David Lameddy's riding until they lost it in a by-election. At a time when the Liberal Prime Minister was an MP from Montreal named Justin Trudeau, who was so unpopular he was unable to campaign in a by-election in Montreal at that time. Now, all the polls would show you that Quebecers have rallied very heavily around a central banker from Alberta who probably had the worst French of all the people there on that stage tonight, because they like his resume. They like the efforts he's making on learning French, and they like his calm demeanor. The Liberals have a floor of seats in Quebec of somewhere in the low to mid-30s, unless there is a real serious collapse. If you look at the growth that they have seen throughout this campaign, you're getting above 40, you're getting close to 45 seats. There were 2 moments this week where Mark Carney could fall flat and blow all of that. That was the Tout le monde en parle appearance on Sunday night, and that was the debate tonight. Those are the last 2 set pieces he has to do exclusively in French between now and the 28th of April when the voting is going to be done. He didn't fail. He probably exceeded some expectations. I know the Liberal War Room is very happy with the way he presented himself. So there appears to be very little from the people I speak with who are deeply involved in Quebec politics to just change the overall trajectory here. I was speaking with Sébastien Dallaire earlier today from Léger, and their polling shows that like 70% of the electorate, they've made up their mind. They're locked in. And advanced voting starts Friday. So after the English debate tomorrow, within 12 hours of that ending, people will go and vote in significant numbers as more and more Canadians are always voting in the advanced polls. Maybe as much as half of the electorate will vote over the 4 days of the Easter weekend. So it takes something seismic to shake some people this late in the campaign. I don't think we really got it tonight. The last chance for that to really happen in a direct way is tomorrow, where that's Pierre Poilievre's chance to raise his ceiling in English Canada, which is kind of more important in the overall standings at the end of it.
And I will just say on that point that Conservatives are happy too tonight. That Mr. Poilievre was calm, he was collected, he did not lash out, he wasn't overly aggressive.
Made his points well.
He made his points well. You know, there were a couple of spots where you could see in Quebec that, you know, it wasn't going to resonate in the same way, whether it be around pipelines or the funding for public broadcasting. But there was nothing that he did tonight that would harm him if he did that in English tomorrow. So if they saw that again, that kind of performance again tomorrow, I think they would be happy because it would be presenting a different kind of Mr. Poilievre to most of Canada.
In fact, I think you maybe saw the setting of a stage for him tomorrow night. Say I said the same thing yesterday in French that I'm saying tonight in English, and then accuse Mr. Carney of not always doing the same thing. That has been an attack point by the Conservatives throughout.
What does that tell you about the message for him to pivot? You know,
for Pierre Poilievre?
For Pierre Poilievre, is it sinking in?
Well, I don't, you know, it was what Margaret Thatcher once said, the lady's not for turning. Right. I would say Pierre is not for pivoting. You know, this is very much an election strategy. They have made some stylistic changes. The slogans have gone away, the 3-word placards, the flag, the maple leaf is there more often. There has been an evolution and an adaptation of the campaign strategy. But he is very much the architect of the strategy and the style that got them to that 25-point lead when the Liberals were extinction levels.
He wasn't aggressive.
Trudeau's resignation, well, Freeland's resignation, Chrystia Freeland on December 16th, Trudeau on January 6th, Trump's inauguration on January 20th, and the start of the tariff war on February 2nd just deconstructed the scaffolding that he had used to build his inevitable majority. So they are still polling really well. They are polling just below where Stephen Harper polled when he won a majority government in 2011.
And normally that would be enough.
Normally it'd be enough, but this isn't normal.
Yeah.
They are not losing so much as the Liberals are winning more. And that's the thing. The NDP has collapsed in English Canada. The Bloc is struggling in Quebec, and it's all coalescing around the Liberals. And that is a difficult thing for just a shift in Liberal strategy to undo, especially when they spent a huge chunk of last fall carpet bombing Jagmeet Singh's reputation in the smithereens because he wouldn't bring down Justin Trudeau's government and give them the election. They were certain to win last fall and less certain to win right now.
The strongest message for any election, as you know, Adrian, is change.
Right.
Yeah. The problem is that Pierre Poilievre is campaigning against someone who is not Justin Trudeau. But that's why you hear him now, especially towards the end of this campaign, keep saying you don't want to give the Liberals a fourth mandate. Nothing has changed. It's more of the same. The problem is it is not the same. There are parts that are the same, but not all of it. So he's hoping that that change message will bust through in a different way. But he's doing it after 2 years of presenting himself as one kind of leader, and now trying to convince Canadians that he smiles a lot, he does like reporters, and that he's happy to take all the questions.
There's something else that has changed too, and it's not just a Canadian thing. You're seeing this in a lot of the data in other countries around the world. Sort of coming out of COVID with the cost of living crisis and the inflation challenges, and incumbents were toxic.
Yep.
And everybody wanted to throw the bums out and bring in change immediately. Trump has fundamentally transformed that by putting the world sort of on a wartime footing as he shocks trade and geopolitics everywhere. And people are sort of flocking to the stable, experienced, sure thing. You're seeing even France, Macron's numbers getting better. You know, there was a change in Germany, but, you know, to a steady, reliable, you know, a change there. And you're seeing that the data would suggest that people wanted incumbents out. Being experienced, being on an international stage experience, these are things that are now assets when they were once liabilities.
Okay, so much more to talk about, and we will. But we also need to talk about the facts. And the CBC News fact check team has been so busy tonight watching this debate. Jonathan Gatehouse has been watching it in particular and is here to talk with us about what it is that caught your team's attention. So, Jonathan, we heard one.
Sorry, back. Sorry, back. I'm gonna snap. Wait, can you not see me still?
I need a new computer.
Polyev said.
And I also have to say that I reject the Century Initiative, which is a Liberal policy to balloon Canada's population to 100 million people. That's extreme.
Okay, so truth here. Do the Liberals have a plan to increase Canada's population to 100 million?
The short answer is no. That number comes from a 2019 report from a nonprofit group called the Century Initiative, who are arguing that Canada needs to hit the 100 million mark by the year 2100 in order to supercharge our economy and become a major world player. It's not a Liberal policy. Carney has attended Century Initiative events in the past, and he recently appointed the group's co-founder, Mark Wiseman, a well-known financier, to his Council of Advisors on Canada-US relations. But Carney has never indicated that he supports the $100 million figure, or 100 million people figure, excuse me.
Right. So I think one of the sharper exchanges tonight, Jonathan, was between Jagmeet Singh and Pierre Poilievre. It was on the subject of affordable housing and the Conservative leader's record when he was in Stephen Harper's cabinet. So just to refresh people's memories here, here's a clip.
He only built 6 homes
200,000
when he was in power.
Can I answer?
We know the answer.
Can
it's
I
6.
answer? It was 200,000 that year, and the cost of the average home was $450,000. So thanks very much for reminding everyone of my record. It was a good record.
Okay, so help us out here. 6 versus 200,000. That is a pretty big gap. Who's telling the truth?
Yeah, I mean, these first competing claims first surfaced last summer, and both the NDP and the Liberals have attacked Poilievre's record when he was quote-unquote housing minister. First thing here is that he never was a housing minister. The Conservatives didn't have one. Poilievre did spend 9 months as the Minister of Employment and Social Development, where he oversaw the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So the 6 houses figure refers to the number of nonprofit or community housing units that were built in the 2015-16 fiscal year. But that's just the ones delivered solely by the CMHC, not those built in partnership with the provinces and territories. If you count those, more than 4,200 were built over that period. And that's still far short of Poilievre's counterclaim that he actually built 200,000. He's talking about the total number of housing units built in 2015. That includes detached homes, condos, and apartments. And only a fraction of those would be classified as affordable or have had anything to do with the government in Ottawa.
Okay, Yves-François Blanchet, leader of the Bloc Québécois, usually takes center stage in the French language debate. Was there anything he said that needs a fact check?
Yeah, there was one particular claim about Mark Carney's position on pipelines. Here's what the Bloc leader said.
Mid-February, British Columbia. You, like all other Canadian leaders, said something in English that was, if necessary, you would use the executive emergency powers. You said it, I heard it again yesterday, you would force pipelines through Canada and through Quebec.
No.
So Carney has talked about creating energy corridors for things like pipelines, railways, power lines, all sorts of energy infrastructure, and so has Pierre Poilievre for that matter. But the new Liberal leader has not said that he would force them through Quebec or any other province.
Okay, this is all very useful. Jonathan Gatehouse, thank you.
Thank you.
And so now, it's not Thursday, but it is time for a special debate night at issue.
There it is.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton here with some of the scenes from the French language debates tonight. Lots to get into with the At Issue panel. They've joined us and they're going to join us again tomorrow. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Good to see you all. Let's just start with who gained anything from this debate. And maybe that's the wrong question because maybe nobody did. But Chantal, do you think that anyone came out of this night in a better shape than they came in?
Yes, but it doesn't change anything to the dynamics in this province in the sense that I'm going to say Mark Carney came out unscathed. None of the punches from the other leaders really landed. And that, by definition, means that he gained because he's got this debate behind him. And by all accounts, it was one of the last best chances for the other parties to change or to reverse the pro-liberal trend that has been manifest in every poll since the election was called.
Okay, and I want to come back to the people that didn't maybe get to where they needed to get to make a difference. But Andrew, your thoughts on whether anyone came out ahead tonight? Not a winner. I'm not asking for a winner. I would never dare ask for that.
Well, you know, when you come in several points ahead nationally and 20 points or more ahead in Quebec, then you win by simply not losing. He didn't hurt his cause, and therefore he helped his cause. Yeah. Conversely, Pierre Poilievre, who needed to make ground on him, didn't help his cause, and in that way hurt his cause. The onus was on him and on Yves Blanchet to make yards in this race and in this debate, and they really didn't. I was struck by the fact that, you know, when the Liberals are 25 points ahead of you, you're really not going to turn that around in a debate. The only chance that either of them got, I think, to claw back some seats in Quebec is to make the anti-Liberal vote coalesce around one party or the other, the Bloc or the Conservatives. And they spent more time attacking Mr. Carney than they did dealing with each other, and I think they missed an opportunity.
Althea?
I will agree that I think Mark Carney had the best performance that of all of the leaders, because the stakes were so high, because he is the primary challenger to all the opposition parties at the moment in Quebec, not just across the country, but in Quebec. And so he had the most to lose, and he didn't step into anything that was problematic. I think Jagmeet Singh, up until the very last moment, probably would have had a good night. I think a lot of people would have been, if they're tuning in for the first time. I know it's not the first time he's on that stage, but you know, my mother was commenting to me recently about Jagmeet Singh's French. She's a francophone. But then he started arguing with the moderator about not having enough time and being cut off when he talked about healthcare. So I think that, sorry for him. I think if you're a conservative or a liberal, you're probably happy with how your leader did. May I just note, though, that while the race in Quebec is incredibly important, the debate that actually sunk the Liberals last time and was a boon to the Bloc Québécois was actually the English debate. It was a Bill 21 question that happened in the English debate, not the French debate. So while, you know, Mark Carney may have walked off unscathed, it doesn't mean that any issues that percolate with regards to Quebec might not come up tomorrow, and that could cause the Liberals some problems.
Well, if we're going to go there,
can we
note that the person who scored for the Bloc Québécois was the actual moderator and none of the other leaders in that previous debate. I'm not expecting Steve Bacon to go down that particular road as the moderator tomorrow.
No, but you can see Yves-François Blanchet doing it.
Yeah. But I'll get to
But Yves-François Blanchet's
in a moment.
big
Go
night
ahead,
was
Chantal.
tonight. Let's be serious.
That's right.
Yves-François Blanchet's big night was tonight. The reason why the last debate was a big night for him wasn't because people were watching, but because of the indignation that he managed to build out of it, and the sense that Quebec had been attacked through him. That's a very different proposition. Now, that being said, I don't know. I expected Mr. Poilievre to have more of a dominant presence on the stage. There were moments when I wondered if he was still on the podium. Yves-François Blanchet...
Well, that's because they're both Quebecois.
I don't think he managed to find it. And Jagmeet Singh did.
Yeah, she's.
I mean, none of them had a bad debate.
I think comprehensible is probably
no sense
the word I'd use that would be the least insulting to XQC. So we'll go with comprehensible.
Thinking I'm missing out on something by not going with one of the other three.
No, I mean, it was a good debate. It was well moderated, and there was lots of things said about different topics. Andrew,
Yeah, it was a very well-run debate. The format was good from the standpoint of democracy and a better understanding.
Sure.
At least the format was. But what is good for democracy in that case is not necessarily good for the opposition parties, because it's harder to land a haymaker. It's harder to create a kind of chaotic situation where somebody can really mess up. So, you know, it was hard to push Mark Carney out of his comfort zone you couldn't sort of gang up on him with a free-for-all the way we've seen in some debates where everyone's talking over each other.
Sure.
But as I say, from the standpoint of actually understanding what they were saying, that was better.
Let's talk about Mr. Poilievre, because Chantal alluded there, Althea, to Mr. Poilievre. She sometimes wondered whether he was there. I would imagine that was partly intentional, that they want Mr. Poilievre to be calm, prime ministerial. They don't want him to be attacking. And I wonder whether you think that worked for him, given that he didn't have as much at stake at all as Mr. Carney.
I think on some key messages, he succeeded. Like, he talked to Quebecers that live in the regions about how he was going to get rid of the Liberals' electric vehicle mandate, that they could keep their cars and their trucks, and that he would build more highways. He spoke to a very segmented group of the province, and I don't think that was not on purpose. He was very clear that he would pass through pipelines, even if some provinces and Indigenous groups say they don't want it, which is unconstitutional, but we'll get to that later, I'm assuming. Where I think that it was interesting is that balance. And you can tell that he's kind of struggling with it because, yes, he needs to act prime ministerial. And in Quebec, I think he's been given the advice that Quebecers don't like it when people fight. But at the same time, a lot of the comments that you hear from Pierre Poilievre on the campaign trail, whether it's in his press conferences or in his rallies about Mr. Carney, that he is unethical, that he has questions to answer on his financial dealings, that he was, the head of Brookfield's funds that have offshore, who were set up in offshore tax havens. The type of criticism that we hear over and over and over from Mr. Poilievre was nowhere on the stage tonight. So that was an interesting strategy choice from them.
Yeah.
Well,
but attacking personally during a debate would be kind of odd. Yeah, Chantal, then Andrew.
No, but it's also that if you're going to stay on topic, and we saw what happened to Jagmeet Singh when he tried to go off topic to talk about healthcare. And by the way, if you're going to do the healthcare thing, maybe better to keep it for tomorrow night, because in this province, healthcare is widely, universally considered a provincial responsibility. And so no one is thinking that Jagmeet Singh is going to come to the rescue and hire doctors and nurses. But on Pierre Poilievre's performance, let's be serious here. Someone tonight needed a game changer to walk away from this debate, to say, I accomplished my goals. And that did not happen to any of the three. We can pick and choose this and that sentence. Vehicle mandates, by the way, in this case, are a provincial legislation backs them. So I'm not too sure that most Quebecers knew exactly what he was talking about some conspiracy to stop people from driving their cars. But we are here to say, will this change the nature of the election campaign going forward? Not in Quebec, it won't.
20 seconds, Andrew.
Well, there's no doubt that this was a more prime ministerial tone that Poilievre struck today. The problem is he needed to strike that tone back in, let's say, January. You can't just show up 10 days before the election and suddenly have a change of demeanor. And he wasn't able to inject more policy differences, which he needs to do to get the focus off of leadership.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here. That was a good first round. When we come back, we'll keep the conversation going about the debates, what we can expect from tomorrow, what happened to the Green Party today. All of that is next.
All right, guys. I think that's where I'm gonna tap us out, because I need to get up early in the morning. You want to know why? Because I gotta drive to Montreal for the English debate. So unless I get jammed out by one of those Rebel News reporters, you might see me in one of those scrums. You might see me in one of those. Oh no! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! You might see me in just too many.
Their like kind of talking points, or at least
Oh,
like
right,
promoting them
Dylan.
in the best way they can to like kind of speak clearly and have a more cohesive thing. Like you look at some of these like Russian narratives coming out, or even like things that Putin has said, and it's like, oh, this is a very structured, logical, quote unquote, or at least
I'll
like,
be
you
all
can
over the
follow
place.
what they're trying to do, and that what you just described, that just screams incompetence.
Oh yeah,
to
no,
me.
you'll
And,
all just be whatever
like,
live stream
maybe
you're
that's
watching.
Tucker,
Just
like
look
playing
around the
defensive. It's
background.
like, oh yeah,
Google.
okay, but that you look at like Donald Trump, like I think I tried to say before that he said
Leo
like, oh, I
DiCaprio
trust
moment
Putin,
here.
he wouldn't
Shoot.
do that.
That's
Like,
Stu.
that's the main narrative coming out from the president. So,
all right,
I don't know. Like, maybe it could be. I think maybe Donald Trump could be that.
Well,
dumb, but
who else should we
Tucker, I don't
raid
think
that
so.
you're not gonna get
so
mad at
to
and you're not
just
gonna
finally
yell at in the
categorize
chat?
This last group, the naive pseudo diplomats are under the belief that if they were just to put in, and this
Here,
was the belief.
We'll do maple takes then.
Catholic churches.
Yeah, Bry Guy, the literal fucking
Actually, 'cause-
Nazi one on that Sam Cedar one is Canadian. She worked for Rebel News.
Yes, there have been remains of Indigenous children found.
No, we'll go to
in
Maple
various
Takes.
places
I
around
like
the
to go to
country, which
Canadians.
seems misrepresented.
Anyways,
Mr. Poilievre gets any
because
questions
then
from right-wing
it's like I don't.
organizations, I would suspect
You
no.
can't hold
Okay.
me
All right,
responsible
let's have a
for their
listen.
content,
Pierre
but at least
Poilievre.
I can say I went with a Canadian. We're doing CanCon on Twitch.
Language outside Quebec. You're talking about expanding access to immersion. What are you?
I want to say, okay, Boomer, so bad. Kate Texture, listen to me. I work in technology. I know how technology
Have a good night,
works.
everybody.
I got a PM from Fabuli,
See you tomorrow
and it
from
did
Montreal.
not bump
Goodbye
her
now.
to the top of my DMs. Fabuli, I haven't talked to
And to
since
YouTube?
the 10th.
Same to you.
On Discord, which means she is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Good
9,
night,
11,